Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through the dim corridors of a Victorian palace, shoes whispering against waxed floors, the lamps burning faintly with the smoky glow of whale oil. You're walking straight toward a carved oak door, taller than 3 men stacked together, and just beyond it lies the world of a royal nursery. You probably won't survive this kind of childhood intact. Spoiler alert, lace rashes, heavy gowns, and way too much boiled beef await you. But you're here for the ride. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The nursery door creaks open and suddenly the air is heavy with lavender sachets and starch. You step onto a rug woven with tiny crowns and lions, and before you is the cradle, a gilded contraption, more like a jewel box than a bed. Gold leaf curls along its sides, and silk canopy drapes down like a waterfall of cream. You lean close, expecting a sweet, cooing bundle. Instead, you find a baby swaddled so tightly you half expect them to squeak like a sausage. Nursemaids hover like hawks, their stiff uniforms smelling faintly of vinegar and starch. One of them gives you the side-eye that says, "Don't breathe too loud near the royal lungs." Daylight streams in through tall windows, but the glass is cloudy, warped by centuries, so everything outside looks like a watercolor. The baby isn't alone, of course. Nurseries in royal households are never just for one child. A cluster of carved wooden rocking horses stand against the wall, their painted eyes staring as if they know too many secrets. Dolls with porcelain faces lounge on a settee. Months old. Forget teething rings, this is bling for gums. Now let's step closer to the nursemaid with the storybook. She perches on a wooden chair, her voice droning in that sing-song way that makes you wonder if she's also trying to hypnotize herself to sleep. She flips pages of a morality tale where naughty children are chased by giant scissors or dragged to hell by goblins. You blink. Yes, Victorians thought scaring children into obedience was an acceptable bedtime strategy. Talk about nightmare fuel. The baby coos happily, blissfully unaware that scissors-armed villains are apparently lurking under the cradle. One quirky tidbit for you: some royal nurseries were known to use safety cages, wooden structures strapped over the tops of cribs to keep babies from tumbling out. Think of it like a baby jail crossed with a breadbasket. Nursemaids insisted it was protective. Skeptics suggested it looked suspiciously like they just didn't trust babies to stay put. And here you are, watching the gleam of brass screws and wondering whether this infant is destined to feel more like a prisoner than a prince. The nursemaid closest to you straightens suddenly, smoothing her apron. A figure enters, grand, imposing, wrapped in velvet. Maybe it's a grandmother duchess, or perhaps a royal aunt with perfume strong enough to knock out a horse. She leans over the cradle, eyes sharp, lips pursed. "Healthy," she mutters, as if inspecting a horse at auction. You can almost hear the nursemaid sigh with relief. For tonight the baby has passed inspection. Tomorrow, who knows? Historians still argue whether royal children were genuinely loved by their families or treated more as political pawns. Some letters suggest genuine affection, fathers sending playful notes, mothers worrying over coughs. But other documents reveal cold detachment, parents keeping their children at arm's length while staff handled every intimate detail. You glance around the nursery, noting the absence of parents tonight, and you can't help but wonder, do they know what lullabies are sung here? Or do they only read reports about how often the baby sneezed this week? As the fire crackles and shadows climb the wallpaper, you feel yourself sinking deeper into this world. The air is warm, the rocking of a chair gentle, the baby's breathing steady. Yet, beneath it all, hums the pressure of dynasty, the silent weight of crowns waiting in the distance. Imagine that, falling asleep in silk sheets while already carrying the burden of an empire. You chuckle softly. No wonder so many of them grew up with stiff spines. They'd been bracing for responsibility before they had teeth. Before you leave this nursery scene, take one last glance at the cradle, the silver rattle, the watchful eyes of nursemaids. You've stepped into the first stage of royal childhood, where innocence is wrapped in lace, but tied down with expectation. The door creaks again, and as you step back into the corridor, the hush of the palace swallows you whole. You're just beginning this journey, and already the walls whisper secrets you'll never quite unhear. The nursery door fades behind you, and now you're pulled into the rhythm of a royal morning. The palace corridors echo with footsteps, muffled by thick carpets patterned with gold threads that look suspiciously like someone was showing off during a weaving contest. You trail behind the nursemaid carrying a tiny bundle, and the day's rituals unfold like clockwork, because in this world, even a sneeze is scheduled. The child is lifted gently onto a high wooden table, polished smooth by decades of other royal bottoms. This is the dressing station, and you, unlucky observer, are about to witness just how complicated it was to prepare a small human for public life in Victorian times. Servants shuffle around like a pit crew at a racetrack, except slower, more delicate, and with fewer engine revs. One loosens the swaddle, another brings steaming bowls of water, and the third unfurls an arsenal of baby clothes that look more like upholstery samples than outfits. Here's the fun part: cleaning. The nurse dips a cloth into warm water scented with lavender, then scrubs gently at the baby's face, arms, and legs. You might think this sounds pleasant, but remember, Victorians were famously anxious about dirt, germs, and moral corruption, sometimes all at once. Soap is applied liberally, though not always the kind you'd recognize. Sometimes it contained harsh ingredients, and you wince as you picture delicate baby skin enduring lye-heavy suds. Still, the result is a pink, squeaky clean child who now smells like a walking sachet. Now for the dressing ordeal. First comes the linen shirt, soft but already starched to within an inch of its life, then woolen stockings carefully tied with ribbon garters. Over that, multiple layers of petticoats, followed by a long gown trailing well past the baby's feet, because apparently practicality had taken a holiday. You laugh quietly. This infant is now swaddled like a decorative lampshade. The final touch is lace trimming, so stiff you wonder if the poor child can even breathe without rattling like parchment. Here's your historical fact for the night. Royal children were expected to wear miniature versions of adult clothing far earlier than common children. While ordinary kids might get away with simpler smocks, princes and princesses had to look the part, even if it meant drowning in brocade before they could crawl. Historians still argue whether this was about instilling dignity early or just about making sure they looked impressive in portraits. You lean toward the second theory. Nothing says responsibility like a 6-month-old trussed up like a bishop. The nursemaids aren't done yet. Hair must be combed even if it's just a few tufts. A dab of rose water touches the temples because presentation is everything. And then the pièce de résistance. Tiny leather shoes, stiff and shiny, buckled onto feet that haven't even touched grass yet. You wince in solidarity. Imagine your toes pressed into stiff leather before you've mastered standing. That's not footwear, that's foot warfare. While the main rituals unfold, you notice a quirky little object on the side table, a silver powder shaker. No, it's not for seasoning chicken, it's for dusting babies with fine starch or talc thought to keep skin dry and healthy. Unfortunately, Victorians didn't know much about respiratory health, so you picture clouds of powder wafting into tiny noses. Nursemaids insist it's good for the skin, though you can almost hear the baby thinking, "Thanks, but I preferred breathing." The dressing ritual is also an audience performance. As the baby is laced, scrubbed, and polished, minor attendants hover nearby, pretending to admire the process. You lean closer, catching fragments of whispered gossip. Who snuck a kiss behind the stables? Boom. Hitch Duchess has a suspicious new necklace. Whether the cook has gone mad experimenting with curry powder. The baby sneezes, and instantly the room falls silent. Everyone waits. Is it a normal sneeze? Or the first symptom of something catastrophic? After all, Victorian childhoods were shadowed by terrifying mortality rates. You can practically feel the anxiety humming through the room. Historians still argue whether royal precautions actually helped children live longer than their subjects. Some evidence suggests the strict cleanliness rituals offered protection. Others say the overuse of harsh remedies sometimes did more harm than good. You watch as the nursemaid slips another woolen layer onto the baby and sigh inwardly. At this rate, heat stroke seems more likely than health. The baby squirms, arms flailing against lace cuffs. For a moment the nursemaid frowns, then distracts the child with a jingling toy, a miniature whistle carved from bone. It makes a soft, eerie note, and you raise your eyebrows. Only in a palace would a whistle double as entertainment and a potential summoning tool for dogs. Now comes the ceremonial unveiling. The nursemaid lifts the fully dressed child and places them into a cushioned chair, more like a throne for someone who can't sit upright yet. Curtains part slightly to let in daylight, and you glimpse a cluster of curious onlookers in the corridor, servants craning their necks, waiting for a peek. Royal mornings aren't private. They're a silent parade. You chuckle softly. Even brushing your teeth would be exhausting if you had to do it in front of an audience. Imagine learning to drool under surveillance. There's another oddity here. You catch sight of a long silver spoon hanging by a ribbon. It's not for soup, it's for silver feeding, where milk or broth was spooned directly to infants. Victorians believed silver had purifying powers, killing germs before they reached the child's lips. Whether or not that worked, you can't help but note the irony. The very phrase, "born with a silver spoon in your mouth," was being lived out, quite literally, by these tiny royals. Finally, the ritual winds down. The baby, fully armoured in petticoats and lace, is carried toward a side chamber where a governess waits. She nods with the solemnity of a judge, inspecting the child like a freshly baked cake. Only once she gives approval does the morning truly begin. You trail behind, noticing how the baby's eyes half close, already drowsy from the sheer effort of existing in so many layers. As you drift along with the entourage, you can't resist a little sarcasm. Imagine needing an entire staff just to put on your socks. It makes your own morning routine. Coffee spilled on a shirt, mismatched socks, maybe forgetting to brush your hair, seem like freedom incarnate. Still, you can't help but admire the precision. This isn't just dressing, it's ritual, symbolism, a daily rehearsal for a role the child hasn't even learned to read yet. By the time the group disperses into another chamber, the palace has fully awakened. Bells chime, doors open, servants shuffle with trays of food and armfuls of papers. The baby, however, simply yawns, drools onto lace, and blinks at the chandelier. You smile softly. Beneath the pomp, beneath the politics, it's still just a child. Warm, fussy, and very much human, even if history has already claimed them. The morning rituals fade into a drowsy blur, and soon you find yourself swept along into the next room, where sunlight pours through leaded glass like liquid honey. This is no ordinary chamber. This is the royal schoolroom, where lessons begin before you've even figured out how to crawl properly. The baby you've been following is now a child, plunked onto a carved chair so stiff you suspect even the wood is judging your posture. You shuffle into the corner, trying not to disturb the sacred business of education. The governess clears her throat with the severity of a general addressing troops. On the table, books are stacked like bricks, their leather covers smelling faintly of dust and candle wax. One particularly hefty volume is a Latin primer, pages crammed with words no child in their right mind would find exciting. The child squints at the ink, mouthing sounds that don't match the shapes, and you can practically feel the weight of generations sighing from the portraits overhead. Here's a historical fact to settle you in. Royal children in Victorian London were often taught Latin, Greek, and religious texts from shockingly young ages, sometimes before they'd mastered basic arithmetic. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely useful or merely symbolic, a way of reminding everyone that future rulers must sound scholarly, even if they never actually conjugate verbs in real life. You tilt your head. Honestly, you'd trade a year of Latin for one decent nap. The tutor, an austere man with spectacles thick enough to magnify ants into elephants, drones about the importance of declensions. The child yawns, but the governess snaps her fingers sharply. Attention must not waver. You notice her habit of pacing the room like a hawk, glancing at the inkpots, ensuring no doodles sneak into the margins. It's discipline over discovery, memorization over imagination. You mutter under your breath. Well, that's one way to kill the love of learning. Suddenly, a new subject is introduced: religion. A miniature Bible thumps onto the desk, its clasp snapping open with the gravity of a court decree. The child recites verses haltingly, the words spilling out like pebbles dropped onto stone. There's comfort here, at least for the adults. Proof that the heir's soul is being molded as carefully as their wardrobe. You lean against the wall, imagining what it must feel like to learn morality through fear of eternal punishment rather than playground squabbles. For variety, the tutor offers a tidbit of science. He holds up a cucumber with great solemnity and declares, "Some gentlemen believe this prevents fainting fits." You nearly choke, trying not to laugh. A cucumber, the mighty defender against swoons. The child looks equally unconvinced, poking the vegetable as though it might squeak. It's your quirky tidbit for the night, a reminder that Victorian science often walked hand in hand with superstition. But not all is humour. There's a heavy seriousness in the air. You can feel it in the way the governess watches the child's every movement, the way the portraits of long-dead monarchs glare down from the walls. Education here isn't about expanding horizons, it's about sculpting obedience. Historians still argue whether royal children were deliberately deprived of play to ensure seriousness, or whether it was simply the fashion of the age. Either way, you notice the child's fidgeting hands, fingers tapping against the desk in a silent plea for freedom. A bell rings faintly in the distance, signaling a change of lesson. Mathematics. The tutor produces a slate, chalk squeaking across the surface like a squeal from a startled mouse. Numbers appear, rows of addition, subtraction, multiplication. The child copies them carefully, though you can see there. A mind wandering, eyes drifting to the window where birds swoop joyfully. You sigh in solidarity. Who wouldn't rather chase sparrows than calculate fractions? Then comes handwriting. Ah, the torture of quills. The tutor demonstrates strokes with a flourish, his letters elegant enough to shame a typesetter. The child dips a quill into ink, and instantly blotches appear like accidental fireworks. A scolding follows, sharp and impatient. You wince. Victorian education prized penmanship as evidence of discipline, but for a child it was more like wrestling a feathered snake. One slip, and your fingers were blackened for days. The governess finally allows a break, though you quickly realize this doesn't mean freedom. Instead, the child is handed a book of moral tales. You peek over their shoulder, stories of greedy children punished by illness, lazy children dragged into ditches, disobedient children carried off by demons with pitchforks. You whistle softly. Victorian bedtime stories weren't for comfort, they were for character assassination. Here's a light joke for you. Imagine trying to sell those stories on modern streaming platforms. Coming soon, The Boy Who Didn't Do Homework and Got Devoured by Wolves. Not exactly Netflix family night material. Still, the child reads dutifully, wide-eyed, and you suspect nightmares are being baked into the curriculum like raisins into pudding. And yet, amid all this seriousness, tiny rebellions sprout. You notice the child's hand drifting toward the cucumber still sitting on the table. They nudge it forward, letting it roll dangerously close to the edge, perhaps hoping it will tumble onto the tutor's foot. You grin. Even royal children crave mischief. Unfortunately, the governess notices and swoops in, retrieving the cucumber with a glare that could scorch wallpaper. You take a moment to imagine what's missing. No crayons, no paint-smeared fingers, no sprawling play on the floor with blocks, just stiff chairs, stiff words, stiff adults. It's enough to make you ache for the child's sound. Ents of wonder. Historians still argue whether this approach produced disciplined rulers or repressed adults. You lean toward the latter. If you spend your formative years staring at cucumbers and conjugations, it's a miracle you don't rebel by adulthood. The lesson drags on until the sun shifts across the sky, casting long stripes of light across the floorboards. The child's eyelids flutter, but no nap is allowed. Knowledge must be crammed in, as though stuffing a trunk for an endless voyage. You rub your own eyes in sympathy, feeling the weight of boredom pressing against your temples. Finally, the governess announces the end of lessons, for now. Books are closed, slates wiped clean, and the tutor bows stiffly before retreating. The child slumps in the chair, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. You can almost hear the thought, all that, and I'm still not allowed outside. As the room empties, you linger, gazing at the abandoned cucumber, the smudged quill, the half-read Bible. It strikes you that this classroom is less about knowledge and more about containment. The child is being molded, shaped, boxed into expectations, and yet you notice the faintest spark in their eyes, a glimmer that whispers, "Someday I'll find my own way." You step softly out of the schoolroom, leaving behind the faint smell of ink and candle wax. The palace hall beckons again, whispering of the next stage in this carefully scripted childhood. And you can't help but smile wryly. For all the cucumber lectures and stern quills, children have a way of wriggling through cracks. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually curiosity always finds a way. Your shoes echo faintly against polished wood as you follow the faint clatter of trays down yet another corridor. The smell reaches you before the sight: boiled beef, nutmeg, and something suspiciously cabbage-like. Welcome to the royal dining routine, where food is not just fuel but a display of order, tradition, and, frankly, an endless exercise in trying to look composed while chewing. You slip into the dining chamber. It's not the grand ballroom feast you might expect. No, this is the child's meal, more modest in scale but still arranged with ceremonial fuss. The table gleams with silver cutlery that looks heavy enough to double as workout equipment. Linen napkins are folded into shapes so stiff they could probably stand trial for treason. And in the center sits a tureen, steaming with broth that smells faintly of marrow and onions. The royal child, perched in a chair with cushions to reach the table, surveys the spread with a mix of curiosity and dread. On one plate, plain boiled beef, the staple of Victorian diets, even in palaces. On another, puddings, some sweet, some savory, each dense enough to double as paperweights. You lean in, almost feeling the warmth of nutmeg drifting from a custard, and then faint whispers from the servants, rumors that the cook, eccentric and stubborn, has been experimenting with foreign spices, like curry. Imagine that, scandal via seasoning. Here's a solid historical fact to season your evening. Victorian royal households often embraced plain, hearty meals for children, believing strong food made strong rulers. Delicate confections and extravagant feasts were reserved for adults. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine health precaution or just a cost-saving measure disguised as virtue. You smirk. Either way, it meant a lot of bland dinners for unsuspecting heirs. The child lifts a spoon, silver of course, and dips it into broth. The taste makes their face twitch. It's hot, salty, a little greasy. You watch, amused as they push it aside, preferring instead the sweet pudding. Rebellion via dessert, the noblest form of defiance. Unfortunately, the governess notices and promptly nudges the pudding plate farther away. "Meat first," she murmurs, tone as firm as the pudding's crust. As you watch this culinary battle unfold, your eyes drift to the sideboard where more dishes await. Roast fowl, slices of bread spread with butter, thick as plaster, bowls of stewed fruit that glisten under the candlelight. It's an odd mix, both abundance and restraint. Nothing is scarce, yet everything is measured. A child of this rank can eat to fullness, yet they are never allowed to choose freely. Even appetite is choreographed. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some records suggest royal cooks occasionally slipped medicinal ingredients into children's meals. Tonics stirred into broth, herbs believed to calm restlessness, even the occasional drop of alcohol to strengthen the blood. You raise an eyebrow. Imagine sneaking brandy into a toddler's porridge. You can't help but mutter, well, that explains a lot about Victorian resilience. Across the table, conversation hums, though it's less conversation, more polite performance. The child is instructed to ask after the governess's health, to compliment the food regardless of taste, to chew with lips sealed tighter than the palace vaults. You notice how often the adult's correct posture, fork grip, and timing. Even mealtime is another etiquette drill. You chuckle quietly. For these kids, table manners weren't just manners, they were survival skills. Historians still argue whether the strictness of royal dining made children more disciplined or simply more anxious. You watch the child chew slowly, carefully, as though the beef might explode if bitten rose. Neng, A sigh escapes you. Imagine being more worried about fork placement than about flavor. Then again, you suppose that's the point. Learning early that appearances matter more than appetite. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. A servant carries in a covered dish, sets it before the child, and lifts the lid. The smell is richer, spicier, ginger, cinnamon, maybe even pepper. You spot the flicker of curiosity in the child's eyes. The cook has indeed sneaked in something unusual, a foreign-inspired sweet, perhaps a spiced bun or a tiny slice of exotic fruit. You grin, half expecting the governess to faint from shock. Instead, she purses her lips, but allows a small bite. The child's face lights up briefly before settling back into practiced composure. This tiny scene sticks with you. Beneath all the starch and discipline, small rebellions thrive, whether in puddings, spices, or the sparkle of delight at something new. It's a reminder that even under gold ceilings, children remain children, curious, hungry for novelty, and secretly plotting dessert revolutions. The meal continues, punctuated by small coughs and clinks of silver. The child eats dutifully, though you notice the growing pile of untouched boiled carrots. You chuckle, proof that even heirs can't escape the universal truth. Vegetables are negotiable. At last, the governess signals the end. A napkin dabs lips. Silverware is aligned neatly, plates are whisked away. The child sits back, full but unsatisfied, eyes already wandering toward the window where faint sounds of life outside, horses clattering, street vendors shouting, call more loudly than beef ever could. You linger in the now quiet dining chamber, the smell of broth clinging to the air. You think about how food here is never just food, it's instruction, symbolism, performance. A spoonful of broth isn't just broth, it's discipline. A spiced bun isn't just sweetness, it's the whisper of a world beyond palace walls. And as you trail behind the child leaving the room, you can't help but smile. For all the pomp, for all the endless pudding, the tiny victories still matter. Even in a palace, even in a cage of etiquette, flavor has a way of sneaking in. The dining chamber drifts away behind you, leaving only the faint aftertaste of boiled beef clinging to the air. The royal child's stomach is full, perhaps too full. And now it's time for that grand illusion of freedom, a walk in the palace gardens. You follow the governess and her carefully orchestrated entourage down a staircase that spirals like the inside of a seashell. When the heavy doors swing open, sunlight and cool London air greet you, along with the faint crunch of gravel under polished boots. The gardens stretch out in manicured perfection, geometric flower beds, clipped hedges so sharp they could rival a barber's blade, and statues glaring at you with that "don't step on the grass" expression. You walk alongside the child, who is bundled in layers that already feel far too warm for fresh air. A governess mutters a reminder, "Posture, dear, posture." So, instead of skipping, the child must stroll, chin lifted, shoulders back, as though preparing for an audience of roses. A historical fact to ground you here. Victorian royal children often spent long, supervised hours in palace gardens, the belief being that fresh air would build healthy bodies and moral fortitude. Historians still argue whether this was genuine health advice or simply a convenient way to display heirs to carefully chosen guests and passers-by. Either way, you can't help but notice how much emphasis is placed on looking presentable, even when simply kicking through leaves. The crunch of gravel grows rhythmic as you pass a row of elm trees. The child peers curiously at a cluster of daisies sprouting rebelliously between cracks in the stones. Instinct says to crouch, to pluck one, to weave a crown of flowers. But no, the governess clears her throat and the daisies are left unplucked. You sigh inwardly. Even in nature, imagination is trimmed shorter than the hedges. And yet the gardens whisper stories. You hear the wind rustle through ivy, smell the earthy dampness of soil freshly watered, and catch a flicker of something playful, perhaps a robin darting close. The child watches intently, eyes sparkling with the thrill of something unscripted. A tiny joke slips into your mind. Somewhere deep down, every royal child probably dreamed of being reincarnated as a sparrow, free to poop on statues without consequence. As you round a bend, the governess leads the group toward the orangery, where citrus trees thrive under glass. The air is heavy with the scent of blossoms and the faint tang of oranges ripening in neat rows. The child reaches out, fingertips brushing a leaf before being gently redirected. Fruit is not for plucking, it is for admiring, for symbolizing the empire's reach. You can't help but roll your eyes. Imagine staring at an orange you'll never get to taste until a banquet decrees it proper. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Victorian palaces, children were sometimes told fanciful tales about fairies inhabiting the hedges, partly to entertain, partly to keep them from wandering too far. You smile at the thought of governesses whispering warnings of sprites and goblins hiding in rose bushes. A clever trick, really. Who needs fences when you've got supernatural pest control? You pass a fountain, its water sparkling under sunlight. The child pauses, mesmerized by the ripples. You can see the temptation in their small hands. Splash, play, feel the cold water. But no, again, rules intervene. Gloves must remain dry, clothing immaculate. Instead, the governess offers a story of some great ancestor who once admired this very fountain, hoping to substitute wonder with reverence. You chuckle quietly. Historians still argue whether such rigid substitutions built character or crushed it. Judging by the child's wistful sigh, you lean toward the latter. The walk continues past gardeners bent over flower beds, their hands stained with soil. One dares to look up, catching the child's eye. There's a flicker of shared recognition. Two humans, one gilded, one grounded, both curious. The moment is brief. The governess gently tugs the child along, away from dangerous fraternization. But you tuck that moment into your memory, proof that curiosity crosses class lines even when etiquette builds walls. The entourage approaches a maze of hedges, tall and winding. For a second your pulse quickens. Could this be the chance for adventure? A child set loose, running through twisting paths, laughter echoing between leaves. You're almost giddy. But no, the governess declares the maze unsuitable today. Too damp, too risky. Instead, you march right past, denied even the possibility of getting lost. You shake your head. In this world, even chaos is forbidden. And yet, humor clings to the edges. A squirrel darts across the path, startling a maid into shrieking and clutching her skirts. The child giggles, an unguarded, genuine giggle, the kind no tutor or governess can drill away. For a heartbeat, the garden feels alive, full of joy rather than rules. You grin, savoring it, even as the governess quickly hushes the laughter back into composure. A bench awaits near the rose garden. The child is seated while attendants bustle with blankets, parasols, and refreshments. A silver cup of milk is offered, warm and frothy. You watch the child sip slowly, eyes drifting to the roses swaying in the breeze. You sense the longing for mud between toes, for hands stained red with petals, for a tumble in the grass. But here, in this gilded cage of flowers, even daydreams must stay tidy. Historians still argue whether these garden walks were meant to instill appreciation for nature or simply reinforce discipline outside classroom walls. Perhaps both. But as you sit nearby, you notice the irony. Surrounded by vibrant life, the child is still restrained, still choreographed. It's like admiring a painting of the sea while forbidden to swim. The walk winds down as bells from within the palace chime faintly, calling the entourage back. Gravel crunches again, hedges fade into the distance, and the grand doors swallow you once more. The air inside is warmer, heavier, as though freedom has been folded away with the parasols. You glance back over your shoulder for one last look. The garden stretches endlessly, flowers blooming, fountains singing, birds darting free, and you can't help but murmur, sometimes the prettiest prisons are planted with roses. The echo of gravel paths still clings to your ears as you re-enter the palace corridors, where the smell of polish and beeswax reclaims its dominance. The garden stroll has ended, and now the child is ushered into yet another chamber of ritual, the dreaded etiquette drills. You follow, curiosity tinged with dread because you know what's coming. Bows, curtsies, and the endless balancing act of behaving like a miniature monarch long before adulthood. The room is simple but purposeful. Tall mirrors line the walls, reflecting every stiff movement. In the center lies a wooden floor, polished until it could double as a skating rink. At one end, a governess and a stern instructor stand like judges at a strange competition. They hold books, canes, for pointing not striking, at least not today, and an expression that suggests no smile has ever crossed their lips. The child is placed squarely in front of the mirrors, tiny shoes squeaking against the boards. Now, the instructor intones, posture, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, arms relaxed but controlled. You catch yourself straightening too, as though the command reached you across the centuries. A thick book is placed atop the child's head. The Book of Common Prayer, no less, because apparently balance must be holy. The child wobbles, knees locked, and you can't help whispering, "Careful, or you'll invent the world's first royal book hat." Here's your historical fact. Etiquette training for royal children was relentless. From the way they entered a room to how they placed a fork on the table, every gesture mattered. Historians still argue whether this obsession was about preparing rulers to command respect or simply feeding the vanity of courts obsessed with appearances. Either way, you're watching a small human being turned into a puppet of ritual, step by painstaking step. The instructor claps once, sharp, echoing walk. The child moves forward, each step deliberate. Heel, toe, heel, toe. The book wobbles dangerously, sliding toward disaster. For a second you root for gravity to win, if only for entertainment. But no, the child steadies, gaze fixed in the mirror. A small victory. The governess nods approvingly, as though this balancing act proves destiny is intact. Next comes bowing and curtsying. The instructor demonstrates spine bending gracefully, head inclining with just the right amount of humility. Too deep and you look servile, too shallow and you risk insult. The child mimics awkwardly, knees knocking together. You stifle a laugh. At this rate, the royal line might end not from politics but from sprained ankles. Still, repetition continues, over and over. Bend, hold, rise, like choreography without music. Your quirky tidbit for the night. Some etiquette manuals of the era actually recommended practicing with small weights tied to wrists or ankles to train the body into elegance. Imagine that, turning children into human marionettes, tugged down by beanbags. You half expect someone to walk in with ankle weights and declare it progress. Thankfully, this palace seems to rely on humiliation and repetition alone. The lesson shifts to greetings. The governess steps forward, playing the role of a visiting duchess. You will extend your hand thus, and you will not grip too firmly. The child reaches out timidly, fingers brushing the governess's glove. Again, she snaps. Over and over, the handshake is rehearsed until even you feel the phantom pressure of endless politeness. You murmur softly, "One day this kid will have a grip like a limp fish," but apparently that's a sign of breeding. Historians still argue whether etiquette training produced rulers who inspired awe or rulers who simply looked like mannequins in fine clothes. Watching the child now, you're inclined to think it was both. There's poise in their movements, yes, but also a stiffness, a lack of joy. You wonder how much of the self is shaved away in exchange for a perfectly executed curtsy. The drills continue. The instructor demands the child recite polite phrases. "How do you do?" "It is an honor." "The weather is quite fine." You snicker under your breath. Imagine a 5-year-old forced to discuss the weather with a countess, nodding gravely as though they had just filed a meteorological report. It's absurd and at the same time tragic. Childhood spontaneity smothered under scripts of civility. At one point, the governess demonstrates how to sit, not just plop into a chair. Oh no, there's an entire method. Approach the chair, turn slightly, lower yourself without bending too much, hands folded neatly in your lap. You watch the child attempt it, wobbling, landing a little too heavily. The governess sighs as though civilization itself is at risk. You think, imagine stressing about chair strategy when the empire spans continents. Then comes the balancing act again. Another book is fetched, this one heavier, with gilded edges. It's placed on the child's head, and they're told to walk backward, turn and bow, all without dropping it. You almost clap at the absurdity. If TikTok had existed back then, this would have gone viral. Royal child fails book balance challenge. Shocking. And yet, amid the monotony, you notice sparks of mischief. The child's eyes dart toward the mirror, where you catch a glimpse of a suppressed grin. On one pass, the book tilts dramatically, and instead of panicking, they give it a subtle nudge, sending it tumbling with a soft thud. Gasps fill the room. The governess scolds. The instructor clutches his chest like he's witnessed treason. But you're silently cheering. A little rebellion, even in etiquette drills, is a victory. Here's another small, delicious irony. In private letters, some royals complained bitterly about etiquette training, mocking the endless bows and rigid posture. One even joked that they were better suited for circus performance than kingship. Historians still argue whether these complaints were exaggerations or genuine misery. Watching this child, you suspect they were entirely sincere. The drills drag on until sunlight fades from the windows. Shadows stretch long across the polished floor, and the child's movements slow with fatigue. Finally, the governess claps her hands. That will suffice. Relief floods the air. The child collapses into a chair, wrongly, messily, gloriously. For the first time all day, posture is abandoned. You smile. Sometimes disobedience looks like simply sitting like a normal human. The mirrors reflect the room's emptiness as the attendants file out. You linger, staring at your own faint reflection in the glass. The child's day has been filled with rules about how to stand, how to bow, how to sit, how to speak, and tomorrow it will all repeat. You can't help but wonder, does etiquette polish a gem, or does it grind it down into dust? As you follow the group back into the corridors, your steps echo with soft sarcasm. Who knew the future of the crown depended so heavily on the art of balancing holy scripture on your skull? But then again, maybe that's the whole point. In a world obsessed with appearances, control is everything, even if it means turning childhood into an endless rehearsal for a play no child auditioned for. The stiff air of the etiquette chamber clings to you as you shuffle behind the governess once more. The mirrors, the endless bows, the holy book wobbling on a child's head. They fade into the background, replaced now by the muffled laughter of children echoing through another corridor. At last, you're about to enter a place where rules falter ever so slightly, the royal nursery's playroom. And here, dear listener, you'll discover that even future kings and queens are not immune to sibling squabbles. The room itself feels warmer than the rest of the palace. Sunlight splashes through high windows, catching on toys scattered across a thick carpet embroidered with crowns and lions. Wooden blocks, dolls in tiny satin dresses, and marbles glitter like small treasures across the floor. And in the middle of it all, two royal siblings, already at odds over a carved wooden horse that looks suspiciously like it might collapse at any moment. "Mine," insists the elder child, tugging at the reins. "No, mine," squeals the younger, cheeks flushed with determination. You suppress a chuckle. Royal bloodlines may shape destinies, but in this moment they're nothing more than children arguing over a toy horse. One gives a sharp pull, and the horse tips, legs snapping off with a dramatic crack. Both freeze, eyes wide, as if the sound might summon doom. For a beat, silence reigns. Then the younger bursts into giggles, while the elder glares like a miniature general betrayed on the battlefield. Here's your historical fact. Accounts from servants and tutors often noted that royal siblings quarrelled fiercely, sometimes more than ordinary children, precisely because they were constantly compared. Who was cleverer? Who was stronger? Who might outshine the other in the eyes of the court? Historians still argue whether such rivalries fostered resilience or sowed seeds of lifelong resentment. You watch the glowering elder and the giggling younger and think, probably both. A governess swoops in, snatching the broken horse and muttering about craftsmen summoned tomorrow. But the damage is done. The siblings have moved on to marbles now, crouching on the rug, flicking them with solemn concentration. Of course, solemn lasts about 5 seconds. The younger cheats, nudging a marble closer when they think no one's watching. The elder protests with righteous fury, hands flying into the air like a prosecutor declaring injustice. You grin. Apparently, even in palaces, marble law is sacred. Your quirky tidbit of the evening. There are reports of young royals becoming so attached to their marbles and toy soldiers that they carried them into formal drawing rooms, embarrassing parents and delighting gossiping courtiers. One future monarch was even teased for weeping when a favourite marble was lost under a cabinet. Imagine that, the heir to an empire undone by a rogue sphere. You look down at the floor now, half expecting a marble to roll out and set history spinning off course. The quarrel escalates. A doll is tossed, narrowly missing a gilded lamp. A block tower collapses, sending pieces scattering across the rug like fallen battalions. Voices rise, shrill with childish fury. And then, tears. The younger bursts into sobs, red-faced, while the elder stands stubbornly, arms crossed. The governess intervenes once more, separating them like a referee. Each child is scolded, each told to reflect upon their behaviour, though you can see from their faces that reflection is the last thing on their minds. Historians still argue whether such discipline truly curbed sibling rivalries or simply buried them under layers of politeness. Letters from royal households reveal both moments of deep affection between siblings and moments of icy distance that lasted into adulthood. Watching this scene, you wonder, are they destined to stand side by side at coronations, or will they remember the broken wooden horse forever? The tension eases slowly. The governess, perhaps tired herself, produces a tray of ginger biscuits. Suddenly peace is restored. Both siblings munch quietly, crumbs dotting their embroidered collars. You laugh softly. Nothing ends a war quite like snacks, an eternal truth across all households, royal or otherwise. Yet even here, in the heart of sibling chaos, the palace whispers in. You notice portraits staring down from the walls, ancestors in armour and gowns, frozen in regal dignity. Their painted eyes seem to judge the quarrels below, silently insisting that heirs should not squabble like common brats. You lean closer to the frame of one portrait, half expecting it to sigh. But the children mercifully ignore the watchful gaze and return to giggling over biscuit crumbs. Then comes the quieter moment, the reconciliation. The elder, perhaps moved by guilt, nudges a marble toward the younger. The younger, cheeks still damp with tears, grins wide, forgiving instantly. You exhale, relieved, because for all the strictness of tutors, the cold discipline of governesses, and the unyielding weight of crowns, love between siblings can still break through, however fleetingly. Here's a light joke for you. Imagine a historian centuries later poring over documents concluding the dynasty nearly collapsed over the custody of a wooden horse. Not quite the grand narrative of wars and treaties, but honestly, probably closer to the truth. The governess soon gathers them for tidying. Toys are put away. Dolls lined neatly, marbles scooped back into velvet bags, blocks stacked into orderly towers that will stand untouched until tomorrow's demolition. The children resist at first, then comply, though not without exaggerated sighs. You smirk. Even royalty isn't immune to the universal law of childhood. Tidying up is the worst part of playtime. As the governess leads them out, you lie. Linger a moment longer. The broken horse lies discarded on a table, its snapped leg awaiting a craftsman's glue. You touch the rough edge and think about how such small quarrels echo into larger histories. After all, crowns pass to eldest siblings, thrones can divide families, and empires sometimes fall not from outside threats, but from arguments at the dinner table. You trail after the group, the sound of muffled laughter floating down the corridor. For now, peace holds. Tomorrow, there will be new toys, new battles, new reconciliations, and you can't help but smile, because beneath the lace and ceremony, the stiff bows and endless lessons, these are still children, fighting, forgiving, and carrying on. Even empires are built on such fragile, funny little moments. The echoes of marble disputes and broken wooden horses fade as the governess steers the children into a quieter room, dimmer and far less cheerful. The smell here is sharper, tinged with vinegar, herbs, and that unmistakable metallic tang of medicine cabinets. You wince because you know what's next, the daily battle with Victorian health practices. If the morning was about looking proper, the afternoon is about swallowing things you'd rather not. The child sits on a cushioned chair, clearly wary. A physician enters, black coat, stiff collar, and a bag of instruments that rattle ominously as he sets them down. He adjusts his spectacles, peers at the child and hums thoughtfully as though examining a rare artifact rather than a squirming youngster. The governess whispers notes. Coughed twice last night. Seemed warm after lessons. Appetite acceptable. The doctor nods gravely, pulling out a small notebook to record the great discovery of mild sniffles. Here's your historical fact. Victorian medicine was an odd mix of progress and superstition. Germ theory was slowly gaining acceptance, but old remedies like leeches and bloodletting still clung to practice, especially in conservative royal households. Historians still argue whether royal physicians were truly ahead of their time or simply overly cautious, terrified of making mistakes on such important patients. Watching this doctor prepare a spoonful of syrup thick as molasses, you're tempted to lean toward the second explanation. The spoon approaches, the child wrinkles their nose, but resistance is futile. The syrup is swallowed, followed by a grimace that says it tastes like liquefied shoe polish mixed with licorice. You can almost taste it yourself, thick and cloying on the tongue. The governess nods approvingly, while the doctor mutters about strengthening the constitution. You roll your eyes. If strength can. From syrup, this child would be ready to wrestle bears by now. Then comes the oddities. A jar of leeches sits on the table, their slimy bodies writhing lazily in cloudy water. The physician doesn't use them today, but he does explain solemnly to the governess that, in cases of imbalance, these may be necessary. You shiver, imagining the cold wriggle of a leech against tender skin. Quirky tidbit of the evening, some royals were so accustomed to leeches that they kept special silver jars for them, engraved like fine teapots. Imagine that, family crests stamped on your blood-sucking pets. The doctor isn't finished. He pulls out a stethoscope, newly fashionable in Victorian times. Pressing the cold disc to the child's chest, he listens intently. The child squirms, protesting the chill. You tilt your head, marveling at how new this practice was then. Historians still argue whether physicians trusted their ears more than their instincts. Some thought the stethoscope was revolutionary. Others dismissed it as a gimmick. You can't help but smile. In this moment, it's just another strange adult trick to endure. A glass of tonic water follows, bitter, bubbly, laced with quinine. The child sips reluctantly, face puckering. You mutter sarcastically, "Ah yes, prevention against tropical fevers, perfect for children who never leave London gardens." But in truth, these tonics were thought to fortify blood, ward off fevers, and instill resilience. You wonder how much was science, how much was superstition, and how much was simply habit. The governess produces a spoonful of cod liver oil. The smell alone makes you gag, oily, fishy, clinging to the air like seaweed stuck in your teeth. The child resists, turning their head, but eventually, with much coaxing, the spoon finds its mark. You laugh under your breath. Every parent, noble or common, has known this war. Cod liver oil versus ties. Nigh lips sealed tighter than a vault. Royalty does not exempt you from gag reflexes. Historians still argue whether these practices genuinely prolonged royal lives or merely made childhoods miserable. Survival rates among royal children weren't dramatically better than commoners until the late 19th century. Watching the child now, cheeks bulging with tonic, you suspect misery might have outweighed benefit. Suddenly, the physician begins lecturing about posture again. This time not for etiquette but for lung health. A straight back ensures strong breathing, he proclaims, tapping the child's shoulders. You smirk. Between etiquette drills and medical demands, posture has become the poor child's most regulated feature. Perhaps one day they'll rebel by slouching gloriously across a throne. Your quirky fringe tidbit, some Victorian doctors recommended odd health regimens like rubbing mustard on the chest to ward off colds or wearing flannel year-round to protect against chill in the bones. You imagine the child sweating in July, swaddled in itchy flannel, muttering curses under their breath. Not exactly the glamorous side of royalty. The physician finally packs away his tools, scribbles another grave note about continued observation, and departs with the solemnity of a man who has just cured the plague. The governess exhales, relieved. The child, however, slumps in the chair, face twisted in lingering disgust. You chuckle softly. For all the grandeur of palaces, some experiences remain universal. Medicine always tastes awful, no matter how shiny the spoon. But the day isn't over yet. The governess insists on airing out the child in the courtyard, part of the health ritual. You follow as windows are flung open and the child is led outside into a drafty, shaded corner. Here, standing in chilly wind, they're told to breathe deeply, fill the lungs, and absorb the healing power of fresh air. You can't resist a sarcastic quip. Nothing says wellness low, like standing in a drafty courtyard while sneezing. Still, the Victorians believed in the power of air, sometimes even more than in medicine. The child sneezes anyway, loudly, causing a maid to cross herself as though demons had slipped in with the breeze. Everyone relaxes when the sneeze passes, but you shake your head. For all the rituals, illness was never far away. Behind every syrup and tonic lurked the shadows of measles, scarlet fever, and influenza, diseases that ignored crowns as easily as cobblestones. As you trail back inside, you can almost feel the weight of these health practices pressing down. Syrups, oils, tonics, leeches, all meant to protect, all delivered with solemn conviction. And yet, beneath it all, you hear the coughs, the sniffles, the whispered prayers that children survive into adulthood. You glance at the child, finally released to play again, and you murmur softly, "For all the crowns and jewels, survival here is still the biggest victory." The door shuts on the medical chamber, the jars and syringes fading into shadow. You exhale, relieved. You've endured another stage of royal childhood, one sticky spoonful at a time, and as you move forward, you wonder, how many more times must this child swallow bitterness before they can taste freedom? The smell of cod liver oil and bitter tonic still lingers in your imagination as you follow the child down another corridor, this time into a chamber humming with softer sounds, music, chatter, and the crackle of fire. Evening has arrived, and with it the drawing room ritual. Here, under chandeliers glowing like captured suns, the royal child must learn to endure the long, tedious performances that fill aristocratic nights. The room dazzles at first glance. Velvet curtains cascade in folds heavy enough to crush a small dog. Gilded frames line the walls, portraits staring down like silent judges, and in the center, a polished grand piano, its lid raised like the wing of a great bird. Candles flicker in silver holders, their flames dancing shadows across ceiling frescoes of angels who probably wish they were somewhere less drafty. The child is seated on a small cushioned chair, dwarfed by the grandeur around them. Adults murmur politely, lords, ladies, and visiting relatives with powdered cheeks and stiff collars. Their conversations blend into a gentle hum, broken only by the occasional burst of laughter muffled behind gloved hands. You stand back, watching the child's eyes glaze over, a clear sign that boredom has arrived and plans to stay. Here's your historical fact. Royal children were often required to attend evening drawing room gatherings, even when exhausted. It was considered training in social endurance, a chance to learn how to sit still, nod politely, and resist yawning in front of dukes. Historians still argue whether this early exposure built confidence or simply crushed spirits. You suspect both, though right now the child looks more crushed than confident. A lady sits at the piano, fingers dancing over keys, launching into a Mozart sonata. The notes float through the room like sugar dissolving in tea, sweet but repetitive. The child stifles a yawn, on la tourds. Eye to be jabbed gently by the governess. Posture, attentiveness, eyes forward. You wince in sympathy. Mozart may be lovely, but to a weary child it's the lullaby of imprisonment. As the music continues, your attention drifts to the chandeliers overhead. Hundreds of crystals catch the candlelight, refracting it into shards that sparkle like frozen fireworks. But listen closely, and you hear something else, a faint humming, almost like wasps trapped in jars. The heat from the candles makes the metal fittings groan, producing an eerie drone that fills the room. You can't help but joke softly. Imagine falling asleep to the sound of angry chandeliers. Meanwhile, servants slip through the crowd with trays of refreshments, glasses of sherry for adults, small cups of sweetened milk for children. A saucer of almond biscuits circulates, and the child's eyes brighten, hands twitching toward them. But no, snacks must wait until the recital ends. You sigh dramatically on their behalf. Nothing says torture quite like biscuits just out of reach. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some reports claim that royal children occasionally nodded off during these events, heads lolling forward until servants had to discreetly carry them out. One prince allegedly snored so loudly during a violin solo that the entire room heard, though everyone politely pretended otherwise. You grin at the thought. Imagine history books recording your greatest youthful achievement as ruining a concerto with nasal trumpeting. The performance shifts. Now comes a poetry reading. A gentleman stands, clears his throat, and begins reciting verses about the glory of empire and the virtues of patience. His voice drones deep and slow like a cow trying to sing opera. The child fidgets, fingers drumming against knees, eyes darting to the clock on the mantel. You feel the same restlessness, whispering internally, "Tick faster." "Ah, please." Historians still argue whether these evenings broadened young minds or merely drilled obedience. After all, exposure to art, music, and poetry might plant seeds of culture. Yet, watching the child struggle to stay awake, you wonder if it only planted seeds of resentment. There's a fine line between cultivating appreciation and cultivating boredom. The governess leans close, whispering reminders. Smile at the Duchess. Nod at the Marquess. Fold your hands properly. Each instruction lands like another pebble on an already heavy load. The child complies, lips curling into a practiced half-smile, but the eyes remain elsewhere, fixed on the fire, where sparks pop and crackle with more life than any poem in the room. Another performance begins, this time a harpist plucking strings delicately. The sound is soft, shimmering, like raindrops sliding down glass. For a moment even you feel lulled, eyes heavy. The child sways slightly, lids drooping. Then, snap! A sharp tug on their sleeve from the governess jolts them upright again. You mutter sarcastically, "Ah yes, the true lesson here. Sleep deprivation builds character." Your fringe tidbit of the evening. Some Victorian drawing rooms were notorious for their stuffy air, heated by coal fires and choked with cigar smoke. One letter describes a royal child coughing violently during a gathering, only to be told sternly to remain seated until the performance ended. You shake your head, imagining lungs full of smoke and syrup, yet still expected to applaud politely. The night drags on. Conversations swell after the music ends, with adults gossiping in hushed tones about politics, scandals, and marriages. The child listens silently, absorbing words like reform, rebellion, and inheritance, none of which make sense yet. But the seed is planted. Even leisure time is a classroom, a place where whispers about power slip into you. Bung ears. You glance at the child, wondering how much they truly understand and how much will haunt them later. Finally, at last, the evening winds down. Guests rise, curtsy and bow, offering parting words. The child mimics perfectly, curtsy crisp, bow shallow, handshake limp yet polite. The governess beams with approval, though you catch the child's tiny sigh of relief when the last guest departs. As servants snuff out candles and chandeliers dim, the room grows quieter, shadows stretching long across the carpet. The child slumps in the cushioned chair, body sagging with exhaustion. For once, no correction follows. The governess allows it, perhaps recognizing the victory of survival itself. You linger in the drawing room as silence deepens. The piano lid closes with a thud. The fire collapses into glowing embers and the portraits fade into shadow. It strikes you that these evenings are less about art and more about training. The art of waiting, the art of appearing engaged, the art of surviving boredom with grace. You smile softly, leaning toward the child who now yawns freely, head tipping against the chair. "Don't worry," you whisper. "Even Mozart would forgive you for nodding off." And with that, the day edges closer to night, one performance closer to dreams. The fire in the drawing room dwindles to faint embers as the last guests depart. Servants scurry about, collecting glasses, smoothing carpets, and closing curtains with the efficiency of shadows. But while the grown-ups breathe a sigh of relief, the real intrigue of palace life begins in quieter corners. You trail behind the royal child as the governess leads them not to bed just yet, but toward the servants' quarters that brush up against the hidden arteries of the household. It is here, with ears sharper than daggers, that gossip leaks through the cracks like steam from a kettle. The corridor narrows, ceilings lower, and the polished grandeur of staterooms gives way to humbler plaster and plain oak doors. Voices drift toward you, hushed but animated. The governess intends only a brief stop to check with the nursemaid, but the child lingers near the archway, curiosity catching like a spark. You stay close, and soon words begin to unfurl. "They say the Duke's debts are worse than ever," whispers one maid, her hands deep in a basket of linens. "And her necklace? Vanished overnight, worth more than a year's wages," another replies, eyes gleaming with scandal. The child listens, wide-eyed, feigning indifference while soaking in every syllable. You can almost hear the racing thoughts behind that still expression. So this is what adults talk about when they think you're not listening. Here's your historical fact for the night. Servants were often the unseen lifeblood of palace gossip. They moved freely between rooms, overheard private conversations, and spread rumors faster than ink across a blotter. Historians still argue whether these whispers shaped politics in subtle ways or simply entertained bored staff. Either way, in households where appearances mattered more than oxygen, gossip was the invisible currency. A butler joins the murmuring cluster, lowering his volume. Historians still argue whether exposure to such gossip humanized royal children or eroded their innocence. Some suggest it prepared them early for the tangled webs of politics. Others claim it poisoned their sense of trust, teaching them that every smile might hide betrayal. Watching the child now, you suspect both. Knowledge is power, but power often weighs too heavily on small shoulders. You're pulled further into the atmosphere of intrigue. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting long shadows across the uneven floor. Somewhere nearby, pots clatter in the kitchens, and the smell of stewed meat lingers in the air. But beneath those ordinary noises, gossip hums like a second heartbeat. It's everywhere, behind doors, in stairwells, tucked between folded sheets. Another servant passes, whispering to a colleague. The Duchess was seen with him again, late, very late. The colleague giggles, covering her mouth with her apron. The child glances up at you, as if seeking confirmation. You shake your head with a smile. Even centuries later, the details may be lost, but the thrill remains universal. Scandal sells, especially when the crown is involved. Here's another light moment for you. One courtier once complained in a letter that the palace runs not on coal nor on duty, but on gossip, which fuels more fires than the furnaces. You chuckle. If only they knew how accurate that was. Servants spreading tales could topple reputations faster than any official proclamation. Eventually, the governess collects the child and steers them back toward more respectable quarters, but you notice the way their steps drag, reluctant to leave the whispers behind. A child who has tasted gossip will never again find lessons in Latin quite as thrilling. Secrets, after all, sparkle brighter than conjugations. Back in the quieter halls, you reflect on what you've just witnessed. The palace item, polished on the surface, dazzling in candlelight, rigid in etiquette, but beneath it all it's a hive of whispers, stories of debts, scandals, stolen jewels, and reckless uncles. To grow up here is to breathe in gossip as naturally as air, to learn that truth is slippery and appearances are everything. The child yawns as the governess nudges them toward their chamber, but even through the fatigue, their eyes gleam with curiosity. You know they'll remember tonight's whispers. Tomorrow's Latin lesson may fade, but the tale of the vanished necklace, that will linger, replayed in quiet daydreams. As the chamber door closes, you linger in the hall a moment longer. The silence feels thicker now, as if the walls themselves are holding back secrets too heavy to tell. You smile wryly, whispering into the quiet. In palaces, bedtime stories aren't about dragons, they're about duchesses and debt. And with that, you step forward, following the child deeper into the night where even heavier lessons still await. The hush of gossip still clings to the corridors as the governess leads the royal child away. Candles flicker low, shadows stretch long, and the air is heavy with the scent of polish and smouldering coal fires. But tonight, before sleep, there is another lesson waiting. One not of words or posture, but of discipline. This is the hour when punishments lurk, subtle or sharp, depending on who caught you misbehaving. The playroom feels different now. Earlier it was warm with laughter and biscuits, but this evening it resembles a courtroom. Toys are neatly stacked away, their porcelain faces staring blankly as if they too are judging. The governess stands stiffly by the hearth, arms folded. The child shifts uncomfortably on the carpet, small hands clasped, eyes darting toward you as though hoping you'll speak up in their defense. The charge? Throwing a doll across the room earlier and refusing to recite Latin declensions without sighing like a tired donkey. Hardly crimes in your eyes, but in a palace obsessed with order, they're enough to warrant correction. Here's your historical fact. Royal children in Victorian times were often subject to punishments, though not always as harsh as those dealt to commoners. Corporal punishment was controversial. Some families allowed it, others forbade it. But strict discipline of some kind was universal. Historians still argue whether these punishments created obedient rulers or simply instilled lifelong anxieties. You're leaning toward the latter as you watch the governess gesture sharply toward the corner of the room. The child is ordered to sit on a low stool facing the wall, silent, motionless, staring at blank plaster. It seems simple, but you can feel the sting of humiliation filling the air. Every giggle from earlier, every scrap of rebellion with marbles or biscuits is crushed under the weight of enforced stillness. You shift, uncomfortably yourself, remembering moments of childhood discipline, the way minutes stretch into hours when you're told to be silent. The governess leaves the child there, stepping back to supervise. Her stern face softens only slightly, and you realize this ritual is as much for her as it is for the child. Order must be restored, chaos punished. You whisper sarcastically, yes, because staring at a wall is definitely the best preparation for ruling an empire. And yet punishments took stranger forms too. Some accounts mention children being denied sweets for days, meals stripped down to plain bread and milk. Others were forbidden from playing outdoors, sentenced instead to extra drills in handwriting or posture. One particularly quirky tidbit tells of a prince forced to copy out entire pages of moral tales whenever he spoke out of turn. Imagine filling your afternoons with endless warnings about greedy children dragged into rivers, all because you said "ugh" during arithmetic. The child fidgets on the stool, small feet tapping the floor. A maid, soft-hearted, tries to sneak a sympathetic glance, but the governess clears her throat, silencing even that kindness. Silence stretches on, punctuated only by the pop of coal in the grate. You can almost hear the child's thoughts, resentment bubbling, boredom gnawing, imagination slipping into darker corners. Historians still argue whether these methods worked. Did they build discipline, teaching patience and obedience, or did they smother spirits, teaching only fear of authority? You watch the child's small shoulders slump, and you think of how many monarchs grew up stiff, brittle, struggling with emotions they were never allowed to express. After what feels like hours, the governess finally calls the child back. They shuffle across the rug, head bowed. A lecture follows, calm, measured, relentless. Words about responsibility, dignity, honor, the family name, words that are far too heavy for such small ears. The child nods mechanically, the phrases washing over them like rain they cannot escape. You shake your head softly. Imagine being scolded not just for throwing a doll, but for insulting the legacy of an empire while doing it. Here's a softer note, though. Some punishments ended with reconciliation. Letters from governesses record moments when children were embraced afterward, reminded they were still loved, still cherished. It was discipline, not cruelty, they insisted. Whether the children felt that love equally is another debate. Tonight the governess softens at last, placing a hand gently on the child's shoulder. The tension eases, if only slightly. But there were harsher stories too. Some children were locked in their rooms for hours, left only with their books and thoughts. Others endured cold baths as corrections, their cries echoing down marble halls. One fringe tidbit mentions vinegar-soaked handkerchiefs pressed to the nose as a reminder of obedience, a sting that lingered far longer than a lecture. You grimace at the thought. Childhood rebellion met with vinegar? That's not correction, that's cruelty with perfume. Tonight's discipline is mercifully mild. The child is dismissed at last, cheeks flushed with the effort of holding back tears. They glance at the toys, but they remain untouched. Play has been soured for now. You walk beside them as they leave, feeling the weight of silence that lingers after punishment. It's heavier than scolding, heavier than the stool. It's the silence of a child reminded that joy can vanish in an instant. As you step back into the corridor, the palace sea. Mrs. Calder, harsher, marble floors echo with every step and portraits stare down with stone faces. You whisper into the stillness. Little one, remember this. Crowns are heavy not just on the head but on the heart too. And yet there is resilience here. Children, even royal ones, bend but do not always break. Tomorrow laughter will return to the playroom. Marbles will roll, biscuits will crumble, dolls will fly. Punishments are temporary, but the spirit of rebellion is stubborn. You smile faintly. Even in palaces, mischief always finds its way back. The echoes of discipline fade as the governess leads the child into yet another chapter of palace life. Tonight it's not about stillness or silence, but about motion, the clatter of hooves, the sway of wheels, the rattle of glass panes in heavy carriages. Travel day. You trail after them through the bustle of preparation, where servants scurry like ants with trunks, blankets, and endless reminders of things not to be forgotten. The courtyard outside bristles with energy. Horses stamp impatiently, their breath steaming in the crisp London air. Carriages stand ready, lacquered black with crests glinting on the doors. Footmen check harnesses, muttering about straps and buckles. The child peers out from the palace steps, eyes wide with both excitement and dread. Travel promises novelty, but also hours of confinement and, worse, nausea from endless jolts. Here's your historical fact. In Victorian times, royal children travelled frequently between residences: Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Journeys could take hours, even days, depending on distance and conditions. Historians still argue whether these trips were meant to expose children to different environments or simply to satisfy the restless desires of monarchs and ministers. Either way, children bore the brunt of endless packing and bumpy rides. The governess ushers the child into a carriage lined with velvet cushions, polished brass fittings, and windows that rattle in their frames. At first glance it looks luxurious, but you slide inside with them and quickly realize the truth. Velvet cannot soften cobblestones, nor can brass silence the relentless clatter of wheels. The carriage lurches forward, and immediately the child grips the strap above, cheeks paling. You whisper sympathetically, "Ah, yes, the ancient royal tradition of carriage-induced queasiness." Servants ride along, one with a basket of provisions, sandwiches wrapped in paper, a flask of warm broth, and inevitably ginger biscuits to combat sickness. The governess pulls out a handkerchief scented with lavender, pressing it under the child's nose. "For the nerves," she says. You chuckle. Lavender may calm the mind, but it can't keep your stomach from revolting on winding roads. Your quirky tidbit for the evening: some royal children were given slices of lemon dipped in sugar to suck on during carriage rides, thought to ease motion sickness. Whether it worked or not is debatable, but you can imagine the sticky mess left on gloves and sleeves afterward. You grin, picturing the governess trying not to faint at the sight of syrupy stains on lace cuffs. The journey continues, streets of London unfolding outside. Vendors shout, chimneys belch smoke, and the smell of horses mingles with coal dust. The child presses a gloved hand to the glass, fascinated yet distant. Outside, life bustles. Ragged children dart between carts. Women balance baskets on their heads. Men shout prices for oysters and fish. Inside, silence reigns, broken only by the clatter of hooves. You see the child's eyes narrow, as though wondering why their world must be so tightly sealed while others run free. Historians still argue whether such glimpses of ordinary life shaped empathy in royal heirs or hardened their sense of separation. Diaries show both outcomes. Some rulers felt a deep bond with the common people after such journeys, while others grew convinced of their own divine difference. You look at the child's thoughtful gaze and hope for the former. The carriage jolts over a rut, sending the child tumbling against the cushions. A footman steadies them, offering a ginger biscuit with a sympathetic smile. The child nibbles cautiously, lips twitching upward at the faint comfort of sweetness. You can't help boo. But joke. Somewhere out there, a historian will one day declare that the empire was held together by ginger biscuits. Hours pass. The child fidgets, legs swinging, boredom gnawing. To pass the time, the governess produces a small stack of books. Moral tales, of course. The child groans softly but begins to read, voice low. You glance at the pages. Another story of a naughty child punished by fate. This one chased by wolves after ignoring curfew. You sigh dramatically. Ah yes, because motion sickness isn't enough. You also need nightmare fuel mid-journey. The scenery shifts as the carriage leaves the city behind. Fields roll out in patchwork greens, hedgerows lining the roads, sheep grazing lazily. The air smells fresher here, though dust still swirls in through the windows. The child leans forward, finally excited, pointing at cows and windmills, questions bubbling that the governess mostly ignores. You grin, because despite discipline and duties, curiosity still wins. A cow, after all, is more interesting than Latin declensions. Another tidbit: Victorian carriages often carried small travel chamber pots discreetly hidden under seats, especially for children. You laugh quietly, imagining the indignity of using one while footmen pretended not to hear. The child shifts uncomfortably at one point, and you half expect the governess to discreetly lift a cushion. Thankfully, the journey continues without that particular indignity. As the sun sinks lower, bells toll faintly from distant churches. The carriage pulls into a small village for rest. Servants bustle at an inn, fetching warm broth and fresh water. Villagers gather at a distance, craning their necks to glimpse the royal child. Some bow awkwardly, others whisper behind their hands. The child, instructed to wave, raises a small gloved hand stiffly. Faces light up, whispers grow. You see pride, awe, and maybe a little skepticism. You murmur, "So this is it, the crown already at work, even before it's worn." Historians still argue whether such staged encounters with commoners were genuine outreach or mere theatre. Watching the villagers beam at a small wave, you suspect both. For them, it's a story to tell forever. I saw the young prince. He waved at me. For the child, it's another drill, another lesson in appearances. Night falls as the carriage nears its destination. Lamps are lit inside, casting golden pools across the velvet seats. The child's eyes droop, head resting against the cushions. Outside, hooves clatter steadily, wheels rumble against stone bridges. You sit quietly, lulled by the rhythm, even as you know the child's sleep will be broken by another jolt any moment. Finally, the carriage rolls into the gates of a countryside residence. Torches flicker, servants line the drive, doors swing open. The child is gently lifted out, still half asleep, and carried into yet another palace of stone and shadows. Travel has ended, but the routine never does. You linger in the courtyard a moment, watching the carriages roll away, horses steaming in the night. The silence here is different, less cluttered, more spacious, filled with crickets instead of city cries. You exhale slowly, whispering into the dark. For all the grandeur, travel days are still just children enduring long car rides, only with fancier cushions. And with that, you step inside, ready to follow as the child begins a new cycle of palace life, one journey closer to the destiny waiting on a throne. The countryside palace smells different. Less soot, more damp stone, with a hint of beeswax polish lingering in the halls. Outside, crickets drone under the moonlight, but inside the governess has yet another task for the evening, exposing the royal child briefly and carefully to the people. Encounters with commoners, though rare and tightly managed, are staged like small plays in which the child must learn their role. You shuffle along as the entourage prepares for this strange act of public theatre. The next morning dawns misty, the grass outside sparkling with dew. The child, dressed stiffly again, starched collar, miniature boots polished to a shine, emerges into the courtyard. A small crowd has gathered just beyond the gates, villagers summoned, their best clothes donned, cheeks scrubbed raw from washing. Some clutch their hats nervously, others nudge children forward, whispering, wave, smile, stand tall. Their eyes widen at the sight of the young royal, who looks more like a painted doll than a child. But still, the murmurs swell. Here's your historical fact. Appearances before commoners were carefully choreographed. Every bow, every wave, every smile was taught. Historians still argue whether these encounters genuinely bridged the gap between monarchy and subject, or whether they were empty performances meant to keep loyalty alive. Standing here, watching the governess whisper reminders into the child's ear, you're struck by how fragile the whole spectacle feels. The child lifts a hand, waving stiffly, fingers barely fluttering. The villagers cheer softly, though their voices are more respectful murmur than riotous applause. You notice how the child's lips twitch into a smile, small, unsure, but enough to spark delight in the faces beyond the gate. For these villagers, this glimpse will be recounted for years. I saw them when they were no taller than my knee. For the child, however, it is simply another drill, one more test in the endless academy of appearances. Your quirky tidbit. Some accounts note that royal children occasionally broke script during these moments. One small princess once asked a villager if she could try their meat pie, to the horror of her governess. Another prince famously asked, "Why do they all smell funny?" a remark that haunted him in gossip for years. You grin at the thought, glancing at the current child who seems perilously close to blurting something equally disastrous. The governess encourages a handshake. A villager, rough hands trembling, steps forward. The child extends their gloved fingers, gripping lightly. The contrast is stark, silk against callus, polish against dirt. You feel the weight of that moment, symbolic in its simplicity. For a brief second, two worlds touch, unequal but undeniably connected. The villager bows deeply, eyes damp, and steps back, whispering to his companions as though he'd brushed against the sun itself. The governess quickly ushers the child along. Prolonged contact risks chaos, too many questions, too many germs, too much unpredictability. The entourage returns inside, leaving the villagers murmuring outside the gates. The child glances back once, eyes thoughtful. You wonder what they're thinking. Are they curious, dismissive, confused, maybe all at once? Historians still argue whether these encounters planted seeds of empathy or reinforced distance. Some rulers grew up to champion reforms, recalling the faces they waved to. Others remembered only the smell of unwashed clothes, solidifying disdain. You study the child's expression now, half curiosity, half discomfort, and silently hope curiosity wins. Later, during a carriage outing to the village itself, the child peers through the window at the narrow lanes. Mud squelches under wheels, chickens scatter, and shopkeepers bow hurriedly as the carriage rolls past. Children gape, some pointing, others hiding shyly behind aprons. The royal child waves again, more confidently now, and a ripple of joy spreads across the crowd. You chuckle softly. Sometimes even the smallest wave feels like a miracle when it comes from someone untouchable. Here's another fringe tidbit. One governess reportedly scolded a royal child for smiling too broadly at commoners, claiming it undermined dignity. Imagine that, punished for being too friendly. Watching this child grin faintly now, you suspect such warnings will follow soon enough. But for the moment, the smile remains, and the villagers beam in return. The carriage halts briefly at the marketplace, though the child is not allowed to step out. Instead, baskets of produce are brought forward as offerings, apples polished to gleam, loaves of bread wrapped in cloth, even a jar of honey, sticky with pride. The child thanks them softly, words coached but earnest. The villagers nod, murmuring blessings, and retreat. The gifts are whisked away, destined for palace kitchens, where they'll likely be catalogued and barely tasted. Still, the symbolism matters, subjects offering fruits of labor, monarchs accepting with gracious detachment. You can't resist a quiet joke, so it's basically trick-or-treating, but with less candy and more politics. The carriage rolls back toward the palace, leaving the village behind. The child sits silently, eyes distant, as though replaying the faces pressed close at the gate. Perhaps they are imagining what life is like beyond velvet and lace, muddy boots, loud markets, simpler meals. Or perhaps they are already learning the art of forgetting, letting villagers lure into a nameless crowd. Historians still argue whether royal children ever truly grasped the gulf between their lives and those of commoners. Letters suggest some did, scribbling notes about poor cottages and thin clothing. Others seemed oblivious, writing only of how dirty or noisy the lower classes were. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Tonight, watching this thoughtful child, you sense the seeds of empathy flickering faintly, though whether they'll survive adulthood's weight is uncertain. Back at the countryside palace, the governess praises the child's composure, though she critiques the wavering smile and the handshake that was a touch too firm. The child listens silently, nodding, though their eyes still linger on the window. You smile inwardly. No amount of critique can erase the memory of calloused hands brushing against silk. As night settles over the palace, you reflect on these encounters. To the villagers, they were extraordinary, a glimpse of destiny clothed in miniature boots. To the child, they were a mixture of confusion, boredom, and perhaps a glimmer of connection. And to you, they are the reminder that power is built not only in gilded halls, but also in the stories people tell when they return home. The little prince waved at me. You lean close, whispering softly as the child is tucked into bed. Remember their faces, little one. They remember yours. The countryside palace sleeps under a blanket of quiet, but tonight the quiet is deceptive. Candles glow in long halls, footmen shuffle about, and the kitchen still smells of roasted meats and sugared confections. For this is no ordinary evening, it is celebration night. Birthdays, anniversaries, victories, christenings. Whatever the excuse, the court knows how to turn routine into pageantry. And for the royal child, these nights are equal parts dazzling wonder and exhausting spectacle. You slip into the great hall just as preparations reach their peak. The room is transformed. Chandeliers blaze with hundreds of candles, casting light so bright you feel almost scalded. Tables groan under the weight of sugar sculptures, pyramids of fruit, towers of iced cakes, glittering jellies that tremble like nervous courtiers. Fireworks lie stacked outside, their fuses coiled like snakes waiting to strike the night sky. Everywhere, color shouts, crimson drapes, golden banners, ribbons laced across doorways. The child enters wide-eyed, mouth open in awe, and for a moment you glimpse the genuine thrill of being alive in this gilded world. Here's your historical fact. Victorian royal celebrations were elaborate affairs, not just for the sake of joy, but as political theatre. Every cake, every firework, every polished note of the orchestra reminded subjects of the monarchy's wealth and stability. Historians still argue whether these spectacles truly inspired loyalty or whether they were hollow displays masking fragility. You glance at the sugar towers and wonder how long they'll stand before collapsing under their own weight. The child is shepherded toward the front of the hall, where a small throne-like chair has been placed. Everyone must see them. Everyone must murmur blessings, compliments, predictions of greatness. The child shifts uneasily, tugging at lace cuffs before settling into a stiff smile. You feel a pang. At an age when most children are content to blow out candles in private, this child must perform the act for hundreds. Musicians strike up a tune, strings swelling, flutes trilling. Dancers sweep into the hall, gowns swirling, heels tapping. The air vibrates with energy, with the promise of something special. The child claps politely at first, then more genuinely as dancers twirl dangerously close, skirts brushing the floor at their feet. You lean in, whispering, "Careful, little one. If they trip over your shoes, you'll be blamed for toppling tradition." Then comes the feast. Servants parade in with trays stacked high, roasted fowl, fish shimmering with sauce, pies oozing rich gravy. But the highlight is always the sweets. Puddings sculpted into crowns, cakes iced with golden sugar, and candies shaped like roses. The child's eyes shine brighter than the chandeliers. The governess reluctantly allows a sugared almond, though not without reminding, "Only one, or your stomach will revolt." You grin, knowingly. No child in history has ever obeyed that rule. Your quirky tidbit. At one famous royal celebration, the dessert table was so elaborate it included a life-size swan sculpted from sugar paste. Guests marveled while children poked at its wings, leaving sticky fingerprints. Imagine explaining to a furious cook that your empire's symbol melted under little fingers. You glance at tonight's wobbly jelly crown and wonder how long it will last before some curious poke ruins it. Outside, fireworks are prepared. The crowd gathers in the courtyard, breath misting in the cool air. The child, now bundled in a cloak, is lifted onto a small balcony for the best view. You stand beside them as the first rocket whistles upward, exploding into a shower of red sparks that paint the night sky. Gasps echo from the crowd below, and the child claps. Lol. Water, bubbling freely for once. The governess allows it, after all, who can resist fireworks? Historians still argue whether these fireworks symbolized national pride or were merely expensive distractions from political unrest. Tonight, watching the colors bloom across the sky, you decide it hardly matters. For the child, it is magic, fireflowers blooming and dying in the span of heartbeats, leaving trails of smoke that curl like ghostly fingers. The crowd roars again as more rockets launch, blues, greens, golden showers that rain down like heavenly coins. The child leans forward on the railing, cheeks glowing, eyes wide. You chuckle softly. Forget Latin declensions. This is the real education: wonder, awe, and a sore neck from staring upward too long. Back inside, the celebration resumes. Glasses clink, laughter swells, and the child is coaxed into dancing. Awkward steps at first, tiny feet tripping over polished shoes, but soon the rhythm carries them along. Other children join in, giggling, spinning, their laughter cutting through the heavy formality of adult voices. You watch with relief. For once they're allowed to be just children, even if only until the orchestra tires. But celebrations carry shadows too. Whispers drift through the crowd about debts, alliances, scandals, muted but ever-present. You notice adults watching the child carefully, as though assessing their future role even in the midst of joy. It reminds you that for all the fireworks and sweets, these nights are auditions. Every gesture is judged, every laugh recorded. The child may think it's a party, but for many here, it's a test. Your fringe tidbit. Some accounts describe royal children falling ill after such celebrations, overwhelmed by too much rich food and excitement. Doctors would then prescribe bland diets of broth and gruel for days. You grin at the thought. Imagine trading a sugar swan for cabbage soup as punishment for having fun. As the night deepens, the revelry finally begins to fade. Guests depart, musicians pack away instruments, servants clear mountains of crumbs and melted jelly. The child, exhausted, slumps against the governess's side, eyelids heavy. They are carried upstairs, still clutching a sticky sweet in one hand. You trail after them, smiling softly at the image. For all the grandeur, all the symbolism, at the heart of it is simply a child falling asleep with sugar crusting on their lips. The palace quiets again. Firework smoke lingers faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of burnt candles and spilled wine. In the child's chamber, a single lamp glows. The governess tucks them into bed, smoothing hair back, whispering a final blessing. The sweet is gently pried from small fingers placed on a tray. The child murmurs something incoherent, then drifts into sleep, fireworks still reflected in dreams. You stand by the window, gazing at the faint haze outside. Celebrations may dazzle, but they also reveal the truth. power is as fragile as sugar sculptures, as fleeting as fireworks. For the child, tonight was wonder. For the court, it was reassurance. For you, it is a reminder that joy, however brief, still survives within walls built more for duty than delight. You turn back to the bed, watching the slow, steady breathing. The fireworks are gone, the music faded, but the sparkle in those small eyes lingers even in dreams. You whisper into the quiet, "Hold on to this, little one, because the world will try to take it from you." The embers of the celebration smoulder into ash by morning. The great hall is stripped bare, sugar towers toppled, ribbons crumpled, and chandeliers smelling faintly of smoke. But behind the glittering memory of fireworks and music, life returns to its regular rhythm. And for the royal child, that rhythm often means sneaking away into secret hideaways, small escapes hidden within the vast machinery of palace life. Tonight you're about to follow them into places the governess would surely forbid. The palace is enormous, with wings stretching like labyrinths, staircases winding into shadows, and attics that smell of mothballs and dust. After lessons, after scoldings, after etiquette drills that nearly broke the child's back, curiosity leads the way. One moment they're supposed to be copying Latin declensions. The next they're tiptoeing behind a tapestry, tugging open a narrow door no adult ever bothers to notice. You slip in behind, and the air changes instantly, cooler, darker, smelling faintly of wood rot and forgotten time. The passage climbs upward, spiraling in tight stone steps. The child's breath echoes in the hollow stairwell, excitement beating against the walls. At the top, an attic, vast and cluttered, the ceiling sloping under the weight of centuries. Dust motes drift in beams of sunlight that squeeze through cracks in the roof. The floor groans beneath small boots, and scattered everywhere, treasures. Here's your historical fact. Palaces often contained hidden rooms and unused attics crammed with relics of earlier reigns, outdated toys, broken furniture, trunks of old clothes. Servants ignored them, governesses forbade them, but children found them irresistible. Historians still argue whether such secret play strengthened imaginations or simply encouraged defiance. You, watching the child's grin widen, think imagination is winning tonight. The first disco. Very is a chest of toys, wooden soldiers with chipped paint, dolls missing eyes, a rocking horse whose mane has worn down to tufts. The child kneels, brushing away dust as though uncovering treasure from a tomb. A doll is lifted carefully, turned over, inspected. The porcelain face is cracked, but the child cradles it gently as if reviving a long-lost friend. You smile. In a palace where everything must gleam, imperfection feels oddly precious. Nearby lies a stack of books, spines frayed, pages yellowed. Tales of voyages, myths of ancient heroes, accounts of explorers who vanished at sea. The child flips pages eagerly, eyes wide at illustrations of sea monsters curling around ships. A giggle escapes as fingers trace the outline of a kraken. You whisper lightly, "Better than another sermon on patience, isn't it?" Your quirky tidbit. In some palaces, children's attics contained bizarre heirlooms like stuffed exotic animals brought back from colonies. One prince famously hid inside a tiger skin to scare his governess. You glance into the shadows now, half expecting a moth-eaten crocodile or a giraffe's head peeking out. Thankfully, only dusty armchairs stare back, their stuffing bursting like tired clouds. The child rummages further, uncovering old clothing, tiny slippers embroidered with fading gold thread, cloaks that smell faintly of cedar. They slip one over their shoulders, twirling, pretending to be someone else, an adventurer, a pirate, maybe even a commoner free from stiff collars. You laugh softly. Roleplay is rebellion here, a way of living lives forbidden in daylight. Historians still argue whether royal children's secret hideaways were tolerated quietly by staff or strictly punished when discovered. Some diaries hint at indulgent servants who turned a blind eye. Others describe stern governesses storming into attics, hauling children back for lessons wit. Dust still in their hair. Tonight at least no one comes. The attic is a kingdom of freedom ruled by giggles and dust, The child's next discovery is a box of odd trinkets, coins no longer in circulation, a cracked monocle, a bundle of letters tied with fraying ribbon. The handwriting is faded, words curling across parchment in flourished ink. The child squints, unable to decipher all of it, but one phrase stands out: "My dearest." They pause, giggling nervously, as though they've just stumbled on scandal. You chuckle. Imagine finding love letters buried in the rafters of an empire, more entertaining than any arithmetic drill. A shaft of light illuminates a forgotten rocking chair, creaking gently as though someone invisible still rocks it. The child approaches cautiously, then pushes it with a finger, laughing as it groans louder. For a moment the attic feels haunted, alive with the ghosts of siblings and cousins who once played here centuries before. You whisper, if walls could talk, they'd have more bedtime stories than all the tutors combined. Then comes the greatest discovery, a small window hidden behind stacks of broken frames. The child scrambles over, wiping dust from the glass, and gasps. The entire countryside sprawls below, fields, cottages, streams glinting in the fading sun. Beyond the gates, peasants work in rhythm, their voices faint. From here the world seems both vast and reachable, not just something glimpsed through carriage glass. The child presses their forehead against the pane, breath fogging it. You feel the weight of longing in that small gesture. Here's another odd tidbit. Some royals reportedly carved their initials into attic beams or scratched notes into walls, secret diaries hidden from watchful eyes. Future generations stumbled on these scribbles, proof that even monarchs once felt the urge to rebel in chalk and dust. You glance at the child's fingers now, tracing patterns absent-mindedly on the glass. Perhaps tomorrow their initials will join the invisible chorus of rebels. The attic exploration stretches into hours. Games are invented with broken furniture. Chairs become ships. Trunks become mountains. A fallen broomstick transforms into a sword. Laughter rings out, muffled by rafters. It's the kind of play that feels timeless, the kind that children crave regardless of crowns or titles. For once, duty is forgotten, replaced by pure imagination. But freedom never lasts long. The governess's voice echoes faintly up the stairwell. "Where are you?" The child freezes, panic flashing across their face. You whisper quickly, "Hide the doll, brush off the dust, act innocent." Small hands scramble, tossing cloaks back into trunks, shoving soldiers under lids. Just in time, the governess's footsteps creak into the attic. Her eyes narrow at the dust on boots, the cobweb clinging to a sleeve. "You know you are not to be here," she scolds. The child lowers their head, murmuring apologies, though the faintest smile lingers at the corners of their lips. The governess sighs, tugging them back toward the stairs. As they leave, you glance once more at the attic treasures, glowing in the fading light, waiting for the next adventure. Historians still argue whether these secret escapes shaped royal imaginations or simply provided temporary relief. You're convinced it was both. In these hideaways, children could dream freely, even if only for stolen hours. Dreams that perhaps carried into adulthood, shaping how they ruled or at least how they remembered their childhoods. Back in the safety of candlelit chambers, the governess dusts off sleeves and mutters about appearances. But the child's eyes remain bright, mind still buzzing with pirates and love letters, rocking horses and views from high windows. You smile. Dust may cling to clothes, but wonder clings to the heart. As the chamber door closes for the night, you whisper into the silence, "Keep your secrets, little one. They'll save you when the world demands too much." The governess has barely dusted the child's sleeves from attic adventures before a new trial arrives, lessons with eccentric tutors. No two are alike, and each carries a peculiar obsession, turning the schoolroom into something between a laboratory, a chapel, and a circus. Tonight you'll witness one of these unusual sessions, where handwriting meets superstition and pigeons somehow predict the weather. The schoolroom smells faintly of ink, chalk, and boiled leather from the bindings of heavy books. Maps hang on the walls, their corners curling, showing vast swaths of the empire painted in pink. A tall, thin man stands at the front, spectacles sliding down his nose, a pointer tucked under one arm. This is today's tutor, though by tomorrow another may arrive, each vying for influence in shaping the future monarch. He begins, of course, with handwriting. The child sits at a wooden desk, quill poised, inkpot gleaming ominously. Your script, the tutor intones, is the reflection of your soul. The quill scratches awkwardly, letters wobbling across the page, ink splatters like raindrops in a storm. The tutor sighs theatrically, declaring that messy letters reveal weakness of character. You mutter sarcastically, or maybe it just reveals quills are impractical torture devices. Here's your historical fact. Victorian royals were drilled endlessly in penmanship, since every letter they sent might be preserved for history. Historians still argue whether emphasis on beautiful script was about communication or simply about displaying refinement. Watching the tutor sneer at a crooked is, you suspect it was more about vanity than utility. After all, messy writing rarely toppled empires. The lesson pivots abruptly. The tutor pulls out a barometer, tapping its glass with a finger. Weather, he declares solemnly, is the mood of nations. The child blinks, unimpressed. To prove his point, the tutor gestures toward the window where pigeons flutter on the ledge. Observe, he says, when pigeons roost low, a storm approaches. When they circle high, expect sunshine. The child tilts their head, fascinated despite themselves, while you struggle not to laugh. Pigeons as weathermen, it's an oddly poetic, if unreliable, system. Your quirky tidbit. One royal tutor actually insisted pigeons could predict not just storms but political upheaval, claiming their restlessness mirrored unrest in the empire. Letters from the time reveal amused skepticism, but the tutor remained convinced until his death. You lean toward the window now, watching the pigeons coo and shuffle, and whisper, "Tell us, feathered prophets, will Latin declensions ever end?" The lesson shifts again, as unpredictable as the pigeons. Now it's geography. The tutor unrolls a massive map, slamming it onto the desk with enough force to scatter quills. "Here," he says, stabbing at India. "Here," stabbing at Africa. "These lands are yours to rule one day." The child's eyes widen, tracing the vast territories shaded pink. The scale overwhelms. So much land, so many lives compressed into paper squares. You feel the weight pressing into the room. Empires are easy to draw, hard to live within. Historians still argue whether such early exposure instilled pride or guilt. Some rulers grew arrogant, seeing maps as proof of destiny. Others grew uneasy, sensing the absurdity of claiming whole continents by ink. Watching the child's quiet stare, you wonder which path they'll take. To lighten the mood, the tutor launches into natural philosophy. He produces a jar containing something unidentifiable, perhaps a beetle, perhaps just a clump of moss. "This," he announces, "is evidence of God's design." The child leans in, nose wrinkling, while you stifle a grin. Nothing inspires awe quite like most "Yes in a jar." Then comes the moral lecture. The tutor insists that knowledge must be tied to virtue. He recites long passages about diligence, honesty, patience. The child shifts in their seat, eyelids drooping. You can't resist. Yes, nothing keeps a child awake like a lecture on patience. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some eccentric tutors believed strange remedies improved concentration. One suggested pressing cold stones against a child's temples before lessons. Another recommended drinking vinegar water to sharpen the mind. Imagine showing up to arithmetic smelling like a pickle. You shake your head, grateful this tutor sticks to pigeons and moss. The lesson lurches back to handwriting. The child grips the quill tighter, determined now, but the ink still blots, spreading like spilled secrets across the page. The tutor groans, declaring, "A future monarch must sign treaties without shame." The child scowls, muttering something under their breath that earns a raised eyebrow. You grin. Rebellion, even in squiggles, is a victory. The governess peers in occasionally, ensuring order. Each time the child straightens, feigning interest, but the moment she leaves, their attention wanders back to the pigeons outside, wings catching the sunlight as they soar. Perhaps those birds represent freedom, or at least escape from endless ink stains. You whisper softly, "Don't worry, little one." Scribbles fade, but daydreams take flight. Historians still argue whether eccentric tutors enriched royal childhoods or confused them with nonsense. Certainly, children exposed to wild theories sometimes developed odd habits of thought, but perhaps eccentricity was its own education, teaching them to question, to doubt, to laugh. Watching the child giggle quietly as the tutor's spectacles slip off his nose mid-lecture, you think laughter may be the best lesson of the day. As the session ends, the tutor gathers his props with pomp, tucking away maps and barometers. He bows stiffly, mutters something about discipline and destiny, and sweeps out, leaving ink stains and moss jars behind. The child exhales, shoulders sagging, relief pouring out in a long sigh. You linger a moment longer in the quiet room. The ink blots glisten, pigeons coo on the sill, and the map curls back into a scroll. It strikes you that childhood here is a patchwork quilt of oddities. Holy handwriting, prophetic pigeons, moss sermons, and yet, hidden within, the seeds of something valuable: curiosity, humor, resistance. As the child slips away towards supper, you whisper into the empty classroom, "Remember the pigeons, little one. They'll remind you that even empires need wings to fly." The echoes of the eccentric tutor fade into the stone corridors, leaving behind the smell of chalk dust and the faint cooing of pigeons outside. But there is no rest for the royal child. Lessons in handwriting and weather prophecies may end, yet another duty rises: religion. Evening shadows gather as the governess steers the child toward the chapel, its tall doors looming like the stern face of heaven itself. You follow, feet soft against the flagstones, feeling the chill creep in as holy rituals swallow the air. The chapel is grand yet oppressive. Candles line the altar, their flames trembling in draughts that sneak through stained glass. Incense coils in heavy ribbons, sinking into lungs until every breath tastes of smoke and spice. Choir stalls stand empty now, but the carved wood bristles with angels glaring down from rafters. The child pauses at the threshold, small hand tightening around a prayer book, before stepping into the solemn hush. Here's your historical fact. Victorian royals were steeped in religious duty from the earliest years. Daily prayers, Sunday sermons, catechisms, and memorization of scripture were considered as important as arithmetic. Historians still argue whether such relentless piety truly nurtured faith or simply drilled obedience into young minds. Watching the child stifle a cough from the incense, you lean toward the latter, ritual too often smothered wonder. The governess directs the child to kneel on a velvet cushion. The stone beneath feels colder than ice, seeping through fabric, pressing discipline into tiny bones. A chaplain clears his throat, voice booming as he recites passages from Psalms. The child echoes faintly, words stumbling, the rhythm more duty than devotion. You whisper wryly, "Yes, nothing says spirituality like repeating lines while your knees go numb." The chaplain begins his lecture, droning on about sin, virtue, and the eternal consequences of disobedience. His voice rolls like distant thunder, heavy with warning. The child blinks slowly, eyelids drooping, though a sharp tap from the governess jolts them awake. You can almost hear their thoughts. "I'd rather be chasing marbles than dodging hellfire." Your quirky tidbit: some chaplains believed incense itself could banish sinful thoughts. The thicker the smoke, the purer the soul. You smirk, watching the child cough discreetly into a sleeve. If that's true, this poor child should already be a saint by now. The ritual continues. The chaplain insists on reciting the Lord's Prayer in perfect cadence. He interrupts often, correcting posture, scolding slurred syllables. Again, he commands, until the words feel like stones tumbling from weary lips. The child obeys, though their gaze drifts toward the stained glass window, where colored light spills onto the floor in patches of ruby and sapphire. You follow their eyes, recognizing the silent longing to be outside chasing those colors instead of repeating verses. Historians still argue whether early religious training instilled genuine belief or left heirs resentful. Some grew fiercely devout. Others, later in life, wrote letters mocking the endless sermons of childhood. Tonight, watching the child stifle a sigh, you sense the roots of rebellion curling quietly beneath the surface. The chaplain shifts into stories. He tells of Daniel in the lion's den, Jonah swallowed by the whale. His voice swells, theatrical, though perhaps unintentionally frightening. The child leans forward despite themselves, imagination sparked by beasts and storms. You smile softly, finally, something gripping. Yet the chaplain ruins the moment by adding, disobedient children suffer similar fates. You groan. Yes, of course, step out of line and suddenly whales are queuing to eat you. Your fringe tidbit. One Victorian chaplain allegedly used graphic stories of eternal damnation as bedtime warnings, describing fiery pits and demons in gruesome detail. Some royal children developed nightmares so vivid that governesses begged for gentler sermons. Looking at tonight's chaplain, you suspect he'd be delighted by nightmares, proof in his mind of piety sinking in. After prayers, the child is ordered to memorize verses. Small lips stumble over lines of proverbs, repeating until the chaplain nods. Each slip earns a frown, each perfect recitation a curt "good." You wince. Praise here is as sparse as warmth in the chapel. The governess encourages a hymn next. The child's voice wavers, thin but earnest, filling the cold air with melody. For a brief moment the chapel softens. Candles flicker more gently, shadows sway in rhythm. You feel it too, a fragile beauty beneath all the sternness. Yet the chaplain interrupts again, correcting pitch, scolding timbre. The moment shatters, leaving only smoke and stone. Historians still argue whether religion offered comfort to royal children or only pressure. Diaries reveal both, some writing tenderly about hymns sung by candlelight, others confessing dread whenever chapels loomed. Tonight, you sense the dread outweighs the comfort. The child's shoulders slump, their hymn drifting into silence long before the chaplain is ready to stop. The ritual ends with blessings. Holy water is sprinkled, chilling droplets sliding down a forehead. The chaplain mutters words about destiny, crowns, and divine duty. The child nods, weary eyes half closed, body swaying with fatigue. You whisper softly, "I doubt even God expected toddlers to hold still this long." At last, the governess escorts the child out. The heavy chapel doors creak shut, muffling the incense and echoing psalms. In the corridor, the air feels freer, fresher. The child yells, inhales deeply, relief plain, as though lungs had been drowning. You sigh in sympathy. For them, religion is less balm than burden, a ritual carved too deeply into days already full of rules. Your light joke of the evening. Imagine one day as monarch, the child declares a law requiring chaplains to preach only stories about puppies and angels. Now that would be reform worth applauding. Back in their chamber, the child is finally allowed to remove stiff shoes, to rub knees sore from cushions. They flop onto the bed dramatically, limbs sprawled, muttering faint complaints. The governess hushes them, but does not scold. Perhaps even she knows enough is enough for one day. You linger by the window, watching the night deepen outside. The chapel spire pierces the sky, silhouetted against the moon. Its bells will toll again tomorrow, calling for more prayers, more incense, more repetition. But for now, silence reigns. The child drifts towards sleep, face softening, freed from the weight of sermons. You whisper into the dark, "Little one, faith should feel like wings, not chains. Someday, perhaps, you'll find the difference." The chapel doors may have closed, but the faint sting of incense lingers in the child's hair as the governess escorts them back through echoing stone halls. Tonight, however, the silence feels heavier than usual. There's a different kind of lesson waiting, not one about posture or piety, but about shadows that stretch far beyond velvet curtains. Politics. Ministers, advisors, and relatives gather in the drawing chambers, their voices low, their arguments sharp, as though the fate of the realm is something to be chewed on between sips of sherry. The child is ushered in quietly, seated near the hearth on a smaller chair that looks like a throne in training. They aren't expected to speak much tonight, only to sit, to listen, to observe. But even silence is a burden when the air is thick with tension. You settle beside them, ready to untangle the threads of intrigue as they weave across the room. Here's your historical fact. Victorian royal households frequently exposed heirs to political discussion early, believing it vital to prepare them for the throne. Some were included from shockingly young ages, while others were deliberately shielded until their teenage years. Historians still argue whether early exposure created wise rulers or simply anxious children forced to carry burdens far too soon. Watching the child's small hands clench around the arms of their chair, you suspect anxiety might be winning tonight. Around the table, men in stiff coats debate taxes. One slams a fist down, rattling a glass. "The people demand relief," he growls. Another counters, "Concessions weaken the crown." Their words volley back and forth, sharp as blades. The child's eyes dart between speakers, trying to follow, though the meaning slips through like smoke. You whisper softly, "Don't worry, you're not alone." Half of them barely understand themselves. Suddenly the discussion shifts to colonies. A map is unrolled, pink territories sprawling across oceans. Fingers jab at India, Africa, the Caribbean. Words like rebellion, reform, and profit crackle in the air. The child leans forward, fascinated by the colourful map, but also unsettled by the sharp tones. How strange to hear grown men speak of lands and lives as though they were chess pieces. Your quirky tidbit: one minister in the 19th century was notorious for referring to colonies as orchards, to be pruned, plucked, or abandoned at will. You imagine the child hearing this, picturing human lives reduced to apples on branches. The absurdity might confuse them now, but one day it could plant seeds of cynicism. The governess leans close, whispering reminders of etiquette. Sit straight, nod occasionally, do not interrupt. The child obeys, posture perfect, though their eyes flicker with curiosity and unease. You grin faintly. Imagine being told to sit still through discussions of famine and reform when all you want is another ginger biscuit. Historians still argue whether exposing children to such grim topics dulled their empathy or sharpened it. Some future monarchs grew detached, treating politics as cold arithmetic. Others developed compassion, recalling the faces of commoners they glimpsed during travels. Tonight, you watch the child's furrowed brow, the small frown, and hope empathy takes root. The talk turns darker still. An advisor mutters about unrest at home, workers striking, pamphlets circulating, whispers of revolution. The word itself seems to hang in the air like a thundercloud. The child stiffens, sensing its weight even without understanding the details. You whisper quietly, "Yes, little one, revolutions are the nightmares of palaces." And now you've heard the word that keeps ministers awake at night. One relative, half smiling, tries to lighten the mood by joking about a crown too heavy for such small heads. The child blushes, glancing down, caught between pride and dread. The adults chuckle politely, though their eyes linger too long. It isn't just a joke. It's a reminder that this small child is already a symbol, already burdened with futures they cannot yet imagine. Your fringe tidbit: there are records of royal children practicing mock debates with tutors, playing out roles of ministers and opposition. Sometimes these rehearsals turned fierce, with children parroting adult arguments they barely understood. You picture tonight's child doing the same in play, pretending to tax marbles or declare war on dolls. A strange, unsettling rehearsal for the future. The meeting drags on. Papers rustle, candles burn low, voices rise and fall. The child's eyes glaze over occasionally, but each time the governess clears her throat, posture snaps back upright. You mutter sarcastically, "Forget lullabies. Political debates are the ultimate sleep aid." Yet something shifts as the evening lengthens. The child begins to listen more intently, leaning in when a minister speaks of famine, tilting their head at talk of protests. Though the language is complicated, the tone, fear, urgency, stubborn pride, seeps in. You can almost see the child's mind shaping questions. Why are people hungry? Why do they fight? Why do the grown-ups look so frightened when they mention change? Historians still argue whether these early impressions shaped how monarchs ruled later. One wrote passionately about social reform, crediting childhood exposure to political misery. Another grew cynical, writing that politics was nothing but endless noise. Tonight you feel the balance teetering in the air, the child's future empathy or apathy still undecided. At last the meeting ends. Advisors bow stiffly. Relatives murmur farewells. Papers are gathered into leather cases. The room empties, leaving behind the smell of ink and burnt tallow. The governess praises the child's composure while the chaplain mutters something about divine guidance. The child simply exhales, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. You linger in the quiet chamber. The map still lies half-rolled on the table, pink territories sprawling like stains. Candles gutter, shadows stretch. It strikes you that politics, to a child, is both invisible and suffocating, a burden they don't yet understand but already feel pressing down. As the child leaves for bed, you whisper into the empty room, "Little one, crowns are forged not just of gold but of arguments and anxieties. May you learn to carry both without breaking." The weight of politics lingers in the air like the incense from chapel prayers. But the palace clock does not stop, and neither does childhood, if you can call it that. Tonight the governess shepherds the royal child into quieter quarters, away from ministers and chaplains, into a chamber lined with tapestries that muffle sound. Here, away from the crowd, the lessons are subtler. How to grow older in an environment that demands adulthood before childhood has even finished. You follow, footsteps soft, watching as playthings are quietly traded for responsibilities. The chamber looks different from the nurseries of earlier years. Gone are the simple dolls and marbles scattered across carpets. Instead, the shelves hold books, rows of them, spines gold-embossed, many untouched. A writing desk waits, its surface cluttered with quills, half-filled notebooks, and letters the child is supposed to practice. The walls are adorned not with toys but with portraits of ancestors, staring sternly as though silently asking, "Are you ready to replace us?" The governess begins the evening with the diary. A leather-bound volume is placed gently into small hands, along with a quill freshly sharpened. "Record your thoughts," she says. "One day, these pages may remind you of who you were." The child hesitates, glancing at you as if to ask, "What thoughts am I allowed to write?" Then, dutifully, the quill scratches across the page. The words are awkward, sentences short. "Today I learned maps and prayers. I waved to the people. I am tired." Here's your historical fact. Many royal children were encouraged or required to keep diaries. Some grew into invaluable records of their lives, full of observations about politics, family, even secret rebellions. Others became little more than exercises in etiquette, carefully censored. Historians still argue whether these diaries reveal authentic voices or artfully curated performances for posterity. Watching the child's stiff handwriting, you can't help but sigh. For now it feels more like an assignment than a confession. The diary is set aside, and a new lesson begins. Diplomacy. The governess introduces scenarios, little role-play exercises. A visiting ambassador presents you with a gift you dislike. How do you respond? The child frowns, chewing a lip. "Thank them politely," comes the muttered reply. "Correct," the governess says, though her eyes demand more detail. Again and again the questions come. What to say if someone insults you? How to react if food tastes terrible? How to speak to people you secretly distrust? The child answers dutifully, voice low, though their eyes keep drifting to the window where the moon rises, indifferent to etiquette. Your quirky tidbit. One young royal was once trained to respond to every scenario with the phrase, "How very interesting." It became a running joke among servants who tested the child by saying absurd things like claiming pigs could fly, only to receive the same solemn answer, "How very interesting." You laugh quietly now, imagining tonight's child adopting the same trick to survive endless small talk. The governess moves on to table practice. A silver fork is placed in the child's hand, then another, then a spoon. "This is for fish, this is for dessert, this is for soup," she recites as though reciting scripture. The child rolls their eyes slightly when she looks away, and you grin. Yes, because nothing says preparation for ruling an empire like memorizing utensil choreography. Historians still argue whether these endless drills prepared rulers for leadership or simply hollowed them out. Some monarchs became masters of politeness, admired for charm. Others grew resentful, wielding sarcasm like a sword. Watching the child's exaggerated size, you suspect sarcasm may win one day. But the governess isn't finished. Tonight there's also a lesson in self-control. The child is handed a tray of pastries, warm, golden, sweet-smelling. Their eyes light up. Then comes the command. You may choose one, only one. The rest you must refuse politely. The child stares at the tray, agony etched across their face. Finally, they pick the smallest tart, nibbling it slowly while servants carry the rest away. You mutter, "Congratulations, little one. You've just completed the cruelest lesson of all." Afterward, the governess shifts to more serious matters. She unfurls a scroll of family lineage, pointing to names written centuries deep. This is your heritage. These are the people you must honor. The child traces the lines, reading names aloud, some familiar, others long forgotten. The weight of legacy presses into the room like an anchor. You whisper gently, "It's a heavy chain, isn't it? Made of names you never knew, pulling you forward, whether you want it or not." Your fringe tidbit. One royal child reportedly burst into tears during such a lesson, crying, "I don't want to be like them." The governess scolded them for insolence, but the moment was scribbled down by servants, surviving as a rare glimpse of resistance. You glance at tonight's child, noting the way their lips tighten, eyes shadowed. Perhaps the same thought flickers silently inside them now. The evening winds down, though not with play. Instead, the child is given correspondence to copy. Thank you notes, formal greetings, polite refusals. The language is flowery, stiff, entirely unlike the diary from earlier. Words like gracious, delighted, and honored spill from the page, though none of them sound like a child's voice. You shake your head softly. Childhood has been edited out of ink. Yet amid the duty, tiny rebellions slip in. The child doodles a crooked crown in the margin of one let. Quickly smudging it when the governess looks over. A stifled giggle follows. You grin. Even ink can become rebellion. Even scribbles a declaration. I am more than your lessons. Historians still argue whether such childhood discipline created rulers who were strong or simply brittle. Watching the child now, exhausted, eyes drooping, yet still doodling when no one looks, you suspect strength comes not from the lessons themselves, but from the quiet defiance hidden within them. At last the governess calls an end. The diary is shut, the utensils gathered, the lineage scroll rolled tight. The child is allowed to stand, stretching sore arms and stiff legs. As they are led toward their bedchamber, you trail behind, noting the heavy contrast. A child's body, still small and fragile, carrying responsibilities too large for most adults. In the bedchamber, the governess tucks them in. Candles flicker, shadows crawl across the ceiling. The child clutches the diary under the pillow as though hiding a secret ally. You smile softly. Perhaps in time those stiff little entries will turn into true confessions. Perhaps one day historians will read them and realize here was not just a prince or princess, but a child who longed for freedom. As the governess snuffs the candles and silence deepens, you whisper gently into the dark. Grow slowly, little one. Don't let them rush you into adulthood too fast. The diary tucked beneath the pillow still whispers of lineage charts and half-smudged doodles when the night deepens. Outside, the countryside palace grows silent. Guards pacing in slow rhythm, wind brushing against stone, owls hooting from dark trees. Inside, the governess dims the last lamp, closes the chamber door, and leaves the royal child alone with the shadows. This is the hour when exhaustion finally wrestles discipline into submission, when duty fades and sleep, sweet, rebellious sleep, takes over. You follow closely, settling at the bedside as the final act of the day unfolds. The bed is no ordinary cot. 4 carved posts rise like sentinels, draped with curtains embroidered in threads of gold. The mattress swallows the child whole, layered with feather-stuffed quilts that smell faintly of lavender. The pillow, wide enough to serve as a raft, cradles a head already heavy with expectations. But tonight, for the first time all day, there are no tutors, no ministers, no governess clearing her throat, only the muffled tick of a clock on the mantel and the faint hiss of embers in the hearth. The child shifts beneath the covers, rolling onto one side then the other, trying to shake off the residue of the day. You can almost hear their thoughts tumbling, the governess's lecture about dignity, the chaplain's thunderous voice promising doom for the disobedient, the ministers debating taxes as though children were already crowns in miniature. All of it hums faintly in their ears. But slowly, thankfully, it softens. Eyelids droop, breath steadies, and the velvet weight of sleep presses closer. Here's your historical fact. Royal children in Victorian palaces often slept in heavily guarded suites, watched over by nursemaids or guards stationed just outside the door. Privacy was rare, if not impossible. Historians still argue whether this constant watch instilled security or paranoia. Tonight you watch as the child's small fingers curl around the edge of the quilt and you suspect both. Comfort in knowing someone stands outside, unease in knowing eyes are always nearby. The chamber is dim, but not entirely dark. The curtains part slightly, letting in moonlight that falls across the floor like silver ribbons. Shadows flicker along the walls, making tapestries ripple as though alive. The child stares at them drowsily, imagination still awake even as body succumbs. Perhaps those shadows look like knights or wolves or even the faint outline of freedom itself. You smile softly. Even dreams require rehearsal here. Your quirky tidbit: some royal nurseries were known to pipe in soft background sounds to soothe children. Wind machines, water basins set near open windows, even musicians hired to strum quietly in adjoining rooms. Imagine that, falling asleep to a hired harp instead of a lullaby from your mother. You listen tonight for such comforts, but only the natural hum of night fills the room. The silence is almost too honest for a palace. The child sighs deeply, and sleep begins to claim them. Breath evens out, lips part slightly, and the day's stiffness melts into softness. For once, posture doesn't matter. Etiquette doesn't matter. Lineage doesn't matter. They're just a child again, sprawled in tangled sheets, dreams tiptoeing in like gentle thieves. You linger at the bedside, whispering to yourself, finally, peace. Historians still argue whether royal children truly rested peacefully in such circumstances. Some diaries mention recurring nightmares, fires, revolts, faceless crowds demanding more. Others describe dreamscapes full of carriages, chapels, and endless handwriting drills. Perhaps the mind never truly escapes what the body endures daily. But tonight, watching the slack face, the slow chest rising and falling, you choose tom-toms. Oh, believe the dreams are lighter. Marbles rolling freely, broken rocking horses miraculously repaired, fireworks blooming forever above rose gardens. You sit back, letting your voice lower into a softer cadence. The chamber is still now, the only movement the flick of flame in the hearth and the tiny twitch of fingers against blankets. Even your own thoughts begin to slow, matching the rhythm of the child's breathing. It is here, at the edge of sleep, that the palace feels most human. Walls no longer echo with arguments, chandeliers no longer hum like angry wasps, and chaplains no longer thunder about sin. The empire pauses, holding its breath while its future heir dreams. You close your eyes briefly, feeling the weight of silence seep into your bones. Your fringe tidbit: one servant once wrote that during the quiet of royal nurseries at night, even the loudest ministers tiptoed down corridors, afraid to wake the heirs. Imagine that, the entire machinery of empire trembling before the soft snore of a child. You chuckle quietly. Power is strange that way. Ferocious in daylight, fragile at midnight. The child rolls once more, settling deeper, lashes brushing cheeks. Outside, a carriage rattles faintly on distant roads, fading into nothing. Inside, time seems to stretch, moments elongated as though eternity has squeezed into this one chamber. You lean closer, whispering, "Sleep well, little one. Tomorrow will demand much, but tonight belongs to you." And now, as promised, let's ease into the wind down together. The air softens, words slow, sentences lengthen like ripples spreading across a still pond. You feel your body grow heavy as the palace quiets around you. The flicker of the hearth becomes a gentle glow, warm and steady, painting the walls with fading light. Curtains sway slightly at the window, stirred by the calm night breeze. Outside, the moon hangs high, silver and steady, casting its glow across fields and forests beyond the palace gates. The child breathes in rhythm with the night. Each exhale is so ifter, each inhale deeper, until even their small chest rises and falls like the tide. You match your own breath to theirs, letting it slow, letting it anchor you. The world beyond, the maps, the ministers, the etiquette drills, slips further away. All that remains is the hush of feathers, the rustle of sheets, the stillness of moonlit silence. Your shoulders relax, your jaw loosens. Every muscle you didn't know was tense begins to ease. You feel the gentle weight of blankets, not yours but imagined, pulling you into comfort. And as you drift with the child into dreams, you realize how far you've traveled tonight. From cradles of gold to dusty attics, from ginger biscuits to firework skies. Each moment carried you further into the folds of history, until now, in this soft chamber, there is nowhere else to go but rest. So let the palace fade. Let the chandeliers go dark, the chaplains grow silent, the ministers vanish with their maps. Let the child sleep, safe for a few precious hours before duty returns, and let yourself sleep too, carried on the same tide of quiet, floating slowly, peacefully into dreams. Good night.